New York, 8 in the morning. Between the rush of typing keyboards and glowing screens, a young woman drained by the corporate routine makes a mistake she never could have imagined. A single wrong tap and an intimate message, a raw confession, heavy with longing and loneliness, ends up in the hands of the most untouchable man in the company, the CEO, cold, distant, unreachable. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. If this story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel, give it a like, because every gesture you make keeps this space alive. And share in the comments. Where are you listening from? New York City. The morning had just begun, but the city was already humming with its relentless pulse. Horns blared from congested streets, steam rose from subway grates, and the glass towers of Midtown glowed beneath a pale autumn sun. Inside one of those towers, on the 38th floor of Callahan Enterprises, the world felt colder than the chill drifting through the city. Harper Bennett sat at her desk, her body stiff with exhaustion. She had worked late again, chasing deadlines that never seemed to matter, polishing reports no one read, preparing ideas that always ended up dismissed. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, and the hum of distant printers filled the office. Around her, colleagues typed mechanically, sipping coffee like medicine. To them, Harper was invisible, a background figure in tailored skirts and quiet shoes, the kind of employee who never caused trouble, who never got noticed, who lived somewhere between competence and irrelevance. And yet, beneath her composed exterior, Harper's spirit was unraveling thread by thread. That morning, while the rest of the floor was settling into routine, Harper's phone trembled in her hand. She wasn't scrolling through emails or preparing another dull spreadsheet. She was writing furiously into the internal company chat, not to her boss, not to her team, but to Jordan, her best friend and confidant who worked a few cubicles away. Her fingers flew across the screen, carrying the weight of sleepless nights, loneliness, and a craving she couldn't confess out loud. "I can't keep doing this, Jordan. It feels like I'm drowning every day in this place. I work myself to the bone, and no one even sees me. I want to feel alive again, touched. Sometimes I swear the only company I have is that stupid pink electric toy in my drawer. How pathetic is that?" Her chest tightened as she hit send. The message wasn't elegant. It wasn't professional. It was raw, desperate, and painfully honest. It was meant to be a secret confession to someone safe. But then her blood froze. The name at the top of the chat screen wasn't Jordan's. It was Lucas Callahan, the CEO, the ice-cold, untouchable man who ruled the company like a god carved from stone. Harper's breath caught in her throat. Her vision blurred. The phone nearly slipped from her trembling hands. She whispered to herself, panicked, "No, no, no, no," as though repeating the denial could undo what she had done. Lucas Callahan, the man she had only ever seen from a distance, descending from his sleek black car with security at his side. The man whose gaze could silence a boardroom, whose words carried the weight of millions. He was notorious for being unapproachable, never socializing, never laughing, never indulging in anything that resembled vulnerability. And she had just sent him a message that was not only unprofessional, but mortifyingly intimate. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Heat rushed to her cheeks. She considered running to Jordan, considered hiding in the bathroom, considered deleting the app entirely and pretending it never happened. But nothing could erase what was already delivered. On the 40th floor, in his private office, Lucas Callahan sat behind a desk of polished walnut. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, and silence hung heavy in the room, the kind of silence that obeyed him. When his phone vibrated, he glanced at it, uninterested. But as his eyes moved over the words, something unusual happened. His brow furrowed, his jaw tightened, and then he read it again. The CEO, who had built his empire on control and discipline, had just been handed an unfiltered glimpse into one of his employees' deepest, most private truths, a confession that was equal parts pain and desire. For a long moment he said nothing. His office remained still, only the faint hum of the city below breaking the quiet. Yet deep inside something stirred. Back downstairs, Harper couldn't focus. Every sound seemed magnified. The ring of a phone, the shuffle of papers, the cough of a colleague. Her own heart was a drum of dread. She stared at the screen, waiting for a reply that didn't come, waiting for her world to implode. Minutes crawled like hours. Her imagination tormented her. Lucas forwarding the message to HR, Lucas calling security, Lucas summoning her to be fired on the spot. She pictured her career ending not with a mistake in work, but with a humiliating confession meant for someone else. And yet, silence. She bit her lip until it hurt. 1,000 apologies crowded her mind, but none could undo the fact that Lucas Callahan now knew her secret loneliness, her craving for connection, her whispered shame about the pink electric company that had become her comfort in the dark. And in that silence, Harper's world shifted. She didn't know it yet, but the accidental message had lit a spark in a man who had spent years living in the cold. Lucas closed his phone and leaned back in his leather chair. His gaze lingered on the skyline, though his thoughts were far from the city. For reasons he couldn't explain, and wouldn't dare admit, her words refused to leave his mind. It wasn't the confession about the toy. It wasn't even the raw sensuality hidden beneath her frustration. It was the vulnerability, the honesty. The reminder that behind the endless reports and presentations, behind the polished smiles and power suits, there were people breaking silently in their cubicles. And this one, this Harper Bennett, had accidentally let him see her. Downstairs, Harper kept her head low, her hands trembling as she typed meaningless numbers into meaningless spreadsheets. She was waiting for the storm, waiting for the inevitable. But the storm didn't come. Not yet. Instead, somewhere high above her, Lucas Callahan had already made a decision, one that would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could possibly imagine. The next morning arrived with an almost unbearable weight pressing on Harper's shoulders. She hadn't slept. Her mind had replayed the horror of the accidental text again and again, twisting it into new shades of humiliation with each memory. By dawn, her eyes were swollen from restless hours, her body sluggish from exhaustion, yet she still forced herself into the carefully pressed suit that had become her armor. The lobby of Callahan Enterprises was as it always was, marble floors gleaming under the golden morning light, the scent of polished wood and fresh coffee filling the air, executives striding past like they owned the city. But for Harper, the familiar space felt like the gates of judgment. Every click of her heels on the polished stone echoed louder than usual, as though announcing her guilt. At her desk, she tried to lose herself in routine, typing, checking emails, pretending. But before her second cup of coffee, the message appeared. From Office of the CEO, Mr. Callahan requests your presence in his office at 9:30 a.m. Private meeting. Her breath caught. Her stomach flipped. Her first thought, this is it. The air seemed thinner, harder to draw into her lungs. Around her, the office hummed on, oblivious, but Harper's hands shook as she set the mug down, the bitter coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. By 9:25, she stood before the elevator doors, her pulse racing so violently she feared others might hear it. Her reflection in the polished steel looked foreign, pale face, wide eyes, lips pressed into a thin line. The ascent to the 40th floor felt endless. When the doors finally opened, silence greeted her. The executive floor was unlike the bustling chaos below. Here the carpets softened footsteps, the air carried a subtle scent of leather and cedar, and the light through the vast windows spilled like a spotlight over a stage no one was worthy of stepping onto. His assistant greeted her with a nod that was neither warm nor cold, simply professional. "You may go in. He's expecting you." Her palms damp, Harper crossed the space and pushed open the heavy door. Lucas Callahan sat behind a massive walnut desk, a figure of absolute composure. His charcoal suit was sharp, his tie precise, his posture effortlessly commanding. Behind him, the New York skyline stretched vast and glittering, a city that bowed to his will. For a second, Harper considered turning back, but his eyes lifted to hers, cool and unreadable, and there was no escape. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice deep, measured, controlled. "Sir," she whispered, her throat dry. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit." She obeyed, perching at the edge of the seat like someone about to face a firing squad. Her mind braced for it. The reprimand, the humiliation, perhaps the termination letter waiting in some folder on his desk. But instead he leaned back in his chair, folding his hands calmly. "You've been here 3 years." The question caught her off guard. "Yes, sir. In that time," he continued, his gaze steady, "I've seen your work buried in reports, overlooked in meetings, dismissed by people who should know better. Tell me, Miss Bennett, why haven't you fought harder for your ideas?" Her lips parted. She blinked. Of all the things she expected, this was not one of them. I wasn't sure anyone wanted to hear them." He tilted his head slightly as though studying her. The silence between them stretched, charged before he said, "Then I want to hear them, all of them." Her breath caught. "Excuse me?" "I want you," he said slowly, deliberately, "to present your projects directly to me. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock sharp. This office." The words slammed into her like a shockwave. She had prepared for shame, for dismissal, for the end of her fragile career. Instead, he had offered her something unheard of, direct access to the CEO, a chance to show what no one else had cared to see. But why? Her mind raced. Was this some cruel test? Was he mocking her? Or, worse, was this his way of toying with the woman foolish enough to send him a humiliating text? She swallowed hard, searching his face for any trace of humor or cruelty, but found none. His expression was unreadable, carved in stone. Yet there was something in his eyes, something she couldn't name, couldn't trust, but couldn't look away from. Her voice trembled. "Yes, sir." Lucas leaned forward slightly, his presence overwhelming even in the smallest motion. "Good. Because if you disappoint me, Miss Bennett, it will be the last meeting we ever have." Her chest tightened. A test, a chance, a threat. She could hardly breathe. He dismissed her with a nod, already reaching for a file as though the conversation were over. She rose slowly, her knees weak, her mind spiraling. She had walked in expecting an execution. Instead, she walked out carrying the weight of an opportunity that could either resurrect her career or destroy it completely. Back at her desk, her co-workers barely glanced at her return. To them, she was still invisible. But Harper's world had shifted in that private office. She sat down, staring at her computer screen, her reflection faint in the glass. Her heart whispered, "He knows. He must know." He read it. He read all of it. And yet he hadn't mentioned a word, not a single word. The question haunted her. Was this sudden opportunity about her work, or about the confession she never meant him to see? At 9:47 a.m., the 40th floor breathed in measured silence. Below it, New York roared with sirens, vendors shouting over the hiss of street carts and the metallic screech of a subway turning its underground curve. But up here, where carpet swallowed footsteps and glass devoured the skyline, the air held the kind of stillness that happened when people waited to be judged. Harper Bennett stood in the corridor outside the CEO's office, hands wrapped around a leather portfolio like a life raft. The document edges pressed into her palms. She could feel the faint imprint of her own pulse beating against the binding. A part of her wanted to run. Another part, the part that had stayed late for years and swallowed criticism that wasn't hers to carry, refused to move an inch backward. Her reflection in the panelled glass didn't look like a woman who had almost been devoured by shame the day before. A narrow black dress, sleeves neat to the wrist, hair swept back, a small pair of pearl studs, clean lines, no noise. She had slept for 3 hours and hydrated like a soldier before battle. Her throat felt lined with frost, but her mind was clear, humming with slides, numbers, timelines, and a single stubborn flame. "You will not be invisible today." The assistant's voice drifted through the doorway. "He'll see you now." She exhaled once, quietly. Then she stepped into Lucas Callahan's office. Morning poured in from the floor-to-ceiling windows, bleeding gold over steel and walnut. The desk was immaculate. No coffee rings, no clutter. Only a pen aligned with geometric perfection and a laptop screen turned slightly toward the seat where he often sat with visitors. Lucas was there, of course, a dark silhouette against the brightness, suit pressed, tie precise, gaze like tempered glass. "Miss Bennett," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Callahan." Her voice landed steady, somehow. He gestured toward the small conference alcove inside his office, an intimate space with a round table, black leather chairs, and a display screen embedded in the wall. As she moved, she could sense him behind her, not touching, not close enough to be seen in her periphery, but present in a way that rearranged the air. She connected her laptop. The screen bloomed to life with the title slide, Project Lattice, revitalizing a failing product line with human-centered design. Beneath it, a photograph of a hand against a window streaked with rain, her quiet nod to the way customers often felt about the company's clunky, unloved product suite. Outside the warmth, looking in. He took the chair opposite. He didn't open a notebook. He didn't prepare to type. He folded his hands and watched her with that unnerving stillness, as if he had trained his entire life to compress impatience into focus. "You may begin," he said. Harper clicked forward. "Callahan's legacy products have survived on name recognition and distribution muscle," she began, voice low, even. "But brand gravity has a half-life. We're approaching decay." She showed the graph. Revenue lines that had once burst upward now flattened, then drooped. Not a cliff, not yet. But gravity didn't need a cliff. It just needed time. She moved to the next slide, screenshots of customer feedback, each line like a bruise. Too complicated, not intuitive. Feels like it was designed by someone who doesn't use it. I only keep it because we always have. "People don't tolerate being ignored," Harper said. "They won't set our products on fire. They'll just stop talking about them." She let the sentence settle. In the silence, the city's distant heartbeat seemed to creep into the room. Sirens, horns, a helicopter thrumming somewhere above the river. She showed her proposed restructuring. Small, cross-functional pods, design, engineering, customer insight, and one senior stakeholder, each owning a slice of the product like it was their own small company. "Pod velocity over committee consensus," she said. "Ownership over bureaucracy." She clicked again. A short video she had filmed with her own money, outside work hours, featuring 3 customers she had tracked down on LinkedIn, in a coffee shop, in a cramped home office, in a factory break room, each speaking plainly about what the product did to their day. "Sometimes it crashes around 3 p.m., said the woman in the blue cardigan, rubbing her temples. "It doesn't save drafts well. I end up retyping inventory notes that I've already written twice." "It looks powerful," said the man at the standing desk, "but it feels like it hates me." The video ended on silence, no soundtrack, just quiet. In that quiet, the critique felt human-sized and impossible to ignore. Harper looked at Lucas. His face was a mask, but something in his eyes had shifted a degree, not softer, sharper. She continued, a redesigned workflow that cut steps by 30%, a prototype interface she had mocked up in Figma, where labels were replaceable and icons learned user habits, a trial of contextual prompts that asked users what they were trying to do before burying them in menus. She navigated the prototype in real time. Here, she said, a novice can log a complex change in under 10 seconds, and here, watch. If the system recognizes repetitive friction, it surfaces a guide without shaming the user. Lucas didn't move, but his eyes followed the cursor like a predator tracking motion in grass. And the pricing model? He asked, his first interruption. She swallowed. Elastic, value-based tiers. We stop selling bundles no one uses. We price for actual outcomes delivered. We give small teams relief and charge enterprises for saving them real hours in bulk. He sat back a fraction, which for him was the equivalent of a raised eyebrow. Risk? Change fatigue, internal sabotage, legacy stakeholders who would rather defend old decisions than create better ones. She didn't look away. Also, me. I'm nobody in this building. I can't walk into rooms I need without someone with authority opening the door. He studied her a moment, then inclined his head toward the screen. Go on. She moved into timelines, resourcing, brutal metrics. These are the only numbers that matter, she said, clicking to a slide that abandoned revenue for a moment and fixated on a different sort of data. Customer effort scores, time to first success, task completion variance by role. If we improve these by even 20%, the revenue graph takes care of itself. She let the next slide breathe, a simple sentence in white on black. We stop building for applause and start building for relief. She didn't expect the small shift she noticed then. Not a smile, not satisfaction, something like recognition. Like the words had touched a place Lucas didn't let anyone name. Harper advanced again. Partnerships with 2 niche vendors, a plan to retire a brittle integration, and a proposed experimental lab, a separate environment where risky ideas could live without poisoning the mainline product. If we fail here, she said, we fail cheaply and honestly. We do not fail in production and tell ourselves it's fine because the quarterly slides look clean. Costs? He asked. She was ready. I cut 3 vanity initiatives, she said. The ones we parade at conferences and then quietly sunset. We redirect that budget. We do fewer projects with deeper ownership. We stop pretending breadth is strength. His gaze landed on her then, unflinching. She felt it physically, like the cold of a window pane against skin. The door clicked softly. Harper's pulse stuttered. Stella Bradford slipped in with a polished smile, as if she belonged to this room by birthright. Nails a neutral pink, blouse perfectly steamed, eyes a merciless blue. So sorry to intrude, Stella cooed, as if courtesy and calculation were the same thing. I thought I'd sit in, since Harper reports to me. Lucas barely acknowledged her. Sit, he said simply. No please, no welcome. Harper's throat tightened, but she kept going. The scent of Stella's perfume threaded through the air, jasmine, expensive and faintly suffocating. The tiny scrape of Stella's chair on the floor sounded like disapproval. Continue, Lucas told Harper. She did. She kept her voice steady, while Stella's presence grew like a shadow at noon. When Harper outlined the pilot group selection, diverse in role, blunt in feedback, Stella interrupted with a small, sweet knife. Such ambition, Stella said, smile unwavering. But these interviews, did legal approve them? I used personal hours and personal equipment, Harper answered, turning just enough to be polite without surrender. No proprietary data, only experience. Stella's smile cooled a degree. Ah. Harper moved on, showing a deceptively simple dashboard, one that would live quietly behind the scenes and expose where customers got stuck in real time. Not with surveillance, but with consent and clarity. Lucas leaned forward. Who built that prototype? I did, Harper said. No engineering support. A friend explained an API over lunch. She allowed herself the smallest breath of defiance. I did the rest. The corner of his mouth twitched, gone before it landed. Stella saw it too. Harper felt the temperature drop by 1/2 degree. She reached the final slide. No fireworks, no slogans, just a plan for the next 90 days with brutal check-ins and a short list of promises. At the bottom, a single line. If this doesn't work, I'll hand you the report that proves it. If it does, you won't need me to tell you. You'll hear it in the quiet, where the complaints used to be. She stopped speaking. The room kept its discipline. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang twice and fell silent. The HVAC whispered. Outside, a seagull wheeled past the window like a mistake. Lucas didn't speak. He let the weight of her work settle where truth always settled, between pride and risk. He stood finally and walked to the window, his reflection layered over the city like smoke. How many people know about this? He asked without turning around. 3, Harper said. Jordan, a designer I trust. And me. Not your manager, he asked. Stella's smile had become porcelain. We have regular one-on-ones, she said smoothly. Harper has a tendency to run ahead. I have been helping her learn alignment. Harper's stomach flickered. Learn alignment. Like a dog taught to heel. Lucas turned at last. The skyline haloed him, all sun and steel, and for a fraction of a second Harper had the irrational sensation that the world would tilt if he asked it to. Miss Bennett, he said quietly, if I gave you a team and 30 days, what would you deliver that I could feel without looking at a spreadsheet? She didn't think. She answered the way truth answers, when it gets a rare chance to be heard. A user who doesn't dread opening our product, she said, and a frontline manager who doesn't have to write a workaround manual for new hires. He considered her, then glanced at Stella. And what would you need from leadership? Harper felt the question burn through her like heat from a furnace door opening. She looked straight at him. Cover, she said, and the authority to say no when the wrong yes is easier. Silence stretched taut. Stella's jaw flexed once. Lucas's voice dropped. You'll get it, he said. It was not a compliment. It was a verdict. Something unclenched deep in Harper's chest. Hope or terror, she couldn't tell. The assistant appeared in the doorway with a hesitant knock, a reminder that a board prep was stacked against the next hour like a thunderhead. Lucas didn't break eye contact with Harper. Schedule a follow-up, he told the assistant without looking. Daily stand-up at 8:30 for the next 2 weeks. Daily, Stella repeated, too light to be neutral. Daily, he said. He looked to Harper once more. Email me the names you want, he said. You'll have them by end of day. Something in Stella's expression recalculated, quick and cold. We'll ensure proper channels are followed, she said, turning the smallest degree toward Harper. I'll help her shape the narrative for the exec committee. Harper nodded as if it were nothing, but her heart found a drum. Shape the narrative. The words slithered. Stella was already taking her measure, already fitting her for a box that could be sealed and labeled and filed under someone else's win. Lucas's gaze flickered to Stella and back. If he heard the slither, he didn't show it. He closed Harper's printed deck with care. His hands were precise, even with paper. Good work, he said, and the 2 words landed heavier than any applause could have. He stood, and the meeting was over. On the elevator down, Harper held the portfolio to her chest and tried not to smile. The doors whispered closed. Her reflection was smaller now, the crown of the city pulling away. As the numbers ticked lower, the 40th floor felt like a different planet, and she felt like someone who had finally learned how to breathe in thin air. The doors opened to the executive anteroom, where assistants moved like chess pieces, quiet, swift, purposeful. As Harper crossed the space, she saw it, the ripple. Heads turned a fraction. Conversations paused a beat too long. Information traveled here like heat through metal. Something had happened in the CEO's office, and while no one knew precisely what, they could smell the shift. It smelled like ozone after lightning. It smelled like change. Down on 38, her floor welcomed her with the familiar choir of printers and clipped greetings and the sour trace of burnt coffee. Jordan's eyes widened as she approached. "Well?" Harper exhaled. "He said yes," she whispered, as if the walls had ears. "To all of it." Jordan closed his eyes for a moment, like a prayer delivered. Then he squeezed her forearm. "I told you," he murmured. "I told you they'd hear you if they were forced to listen." Before she could answer, Stella appeared, summoned by some internal compass that always pointed toward credit. She glided through the rows of desks, a smile that never touched her eyes. "Harper," she said, voice soft enough to sound safe, sharp enough to cut. "Let's make sure your momentum turns into something sustainable. Come to my office in 10. We'll craft your announcement. It has to land correctly." Jordan's hand fell from Harper's arm. He looked at her with a warning she already understood. "Of course," Harper said, the words tasting like foil. Stella's smile brightened by half a watt. "Wonderful. Oh, and send me your deck. I'll share it with a few key people so they're aligned before you roll anything out." Harper felt the first cold lick of dread. Not fear of failing now, fear of being harvested. She forced herself to nod. "I'll bring a copy," she said. "There are updates I need to finish before it circulates." Stella held her gaze a hair too long. Then she pivoted away, heels soft on carpet, perfume trailing, a pretty ghost. Jordan leaned in, voice barely above a breath. "She's going to try to absorb this into her orbit," he said. "Don't send her the source files." "I won't," Harper said, though the edges of her certainty were already fraying. Her computer woke to life when she touched the keyboard. Notifications unfurled like flags, calendar invites from the office of the CEO, 8:30 a.m. daily stand-up, a placeholder for Project Lattice, Leadership Sync, a shared folder request from someone she didn't know in strategy, and one from Stella. "Send full deck plus prototypes for review." Harper's finger hovered over her trackpad. She could feel the exact moment the office air shifted again. Conversations lifted and fell in odd cadences. A manager from another team, a man who had never once looked her in the eye, stopped at her desk as if he had always intended to welcome her to the company. "Great work up there," he said vaguely, because he didn't know what she had done, only that she had done it before he had. "Thank you," she said, voice neutral as stone. Her cursor blinked over the share button. The soft sound of typing, the whir of the air vents, a phone ringing, a laughter too loud, then shushed. Everything gathered inside her, like a wave deciding whether to break. She looked at Jordan. He gave her a look that said, "You know, and be careful. And this is the moment." Harper clicked open a draft email to Lucas instead. She typed with the same precision she had used in the presentation. "I'll send materials to you directly until roles are formalized. Requesting clarity on distribution to prevent misalignment." She read it once, twice. It was clean. It was a line drawn without raising her voice. She didn't hit send. Not yet. Because in the periphery of her screen, a new notification appeared. One that did not come from Lucas or his office. It came from Executive Council Prep, Bradford. Meeting in 30 minutes, Strategic Initiatives, Q4. Attached was a slide deck. Harper recognized her own language in the file name. She recognized, even in the preview, the ghost of her title. Her breath caught. She opened the attachment. The first slide bloomed. Strategic Transformation Pods. A Vision for Customer-Centric Velocity. By Stella Bradford. Harper's mouth went dry. She scrolled, pasted graphs, reworded headlines, the coffee shop interview stills, hers, recast, softened, and branded. Her finger trembled over the trackpad. Jordan's whisper barely carried. "Harp." The office, once a dull hum, surged in her ears like a distant ocean, the kind that sounded beautiful until you felt the undertow pull at your ankles. She stared at the screen. All that work, all that truth, all that quiet, and in 30 minutes it would have a different name. Her phone buzzed. A message. From Lucas Callahan. Short, unadorned, a knife's edge of language. 10 minutes. My office. Bring your latest. Harper looked up, the ceiling lights blurring in her vision until they turned to stars. The cursor on her draft email pulsed like a second heartbeat. The clock on her monitor shifted from 9:59 to 10 with a tiny, traitorous click. She rose, portfolio in hand, and tried to breathe as the entire floor seemed to tilt under her feet. She started toward the elevator, toward the 40th floor, toward the question that had no easy answer. And somewhere between the second and third step, she wondered, if the price of being seen was being stolen, what would she be willing to do to stay visible? The elevator chimed. Doors whispered open. She stepped in. The doors began to close. And just before they sealed, a manicured hand slid through the gap, halting them, a soft perfume entering first, followed by a polished smile that belonged to someone who never asked permission, only forgiveness. The executive conference room on the 41st floor had its own climate. Colder than the rest of the building, the air whispered from vents tucked into the crown molding, keeping minds sharp and voices crisp. A long table of smoked oak stretched beneath pendant lights that pooled brightness in perfect ellipses, leaving the corners of the room in dignified dusk. On the sideboard, white porcelain cups stood in military formation beside a silver carafe that smelled faintly of roasted hazelnut. Beyond the windows, the city moved like a distant ocean. Yellow cabs sliding through currents, people reduced to the flicker of schools of fish. Harper entered on the dot, portfolio tucked under her arm, her pulse audible in her throat. She felt like a smudge on the glass of a museum case, present but never meant to touch. Directors and VPs took their seats with careful choreography, sliding leather chairs without scraping, clearing throats into closed fists, turning phones face down in gestures of performance rather than surrender. A few glanced at her with polite curiosity, the detached attention reserved for junior staff brought in as props. At the head of the table, Lucas Callahan scanned the printed agenda. His tie was a shade darker than ink. His cufflinks caught the light like decisive stars. He didn't look at Harper, but she felt his awareness anyway, fine as filaments strung between them. Strategic initiatives, the COO announced, flipping a tab in his binder. Bradford, you're up. Stella rose. The room rewarded her with automatic silence. She moved with the certainty of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Her blouse was winter white, her smile the color of champagne, and her laptop connected to the wall display with a smooth, practiced click. The title slide filled the screen, Strategic Transformation Pods, a vision for customer-centric velocity, presented by Stella Bradford, SVP Product Operations. The breath in Harper's chest turned to glass. She couldn't blink. She couldn't move. The font choice was different, sleeker, Stella's. The palette had been softened to boardroom-safe blues, but the bones were unmistakable. Graphs with barely altered labels. Screenshots reframed with rounded corners. Even the coffee shop stills, faces of users Harper had interviewed on her own time, now appeared in a slick montage, dissolving gently into one another under a corporate watermark, as if branding could bless what was stolen. Stella began with practiced warmth. "We've been listening," she said, as though she herself were the very organ of hearing. "Customers want ease, fluency, and the sense that our products work with them instead of against them." Heads nodded, men with soft hands and expensive watches, women with surgically anchored poise. They nodded because the words were true. They nodded because truth is easy to sell when it comes from a trusted mouth. Harper felt her own mouth shape the absent words. She had rehearsed this rhythm alone at midnight, in her kitchen, over a sink of drying dishes and the hum of an old refrigerator offering mechanical sympathy. Now those words were out in the world, in someone else's voice, and the hum in her ears was no longer sympathy. It was static. It was the interference pattern of rage, grief, and disbelief sharpened into a cold blade. Stella's slides unfurled. Pods, ownership over bureaucracy, an experimental lab to fail cheaply and honestly. Stella lingered on the phrase with a neat laugh as if she had coined it herself. Metrics appeared, but even here she had sanded the edges. Customer effort score became experience uplift index. Time to first success became onboarding glow, a brandable, photogenic term executives could pair with stock photos of smiling interns instead of imagining warehouse managers at 3 p.m. watching the system crash. Harper's fingers dug crescents into the leather of her portfolio. From the back wall, Jordan caught her eye once. Quick, fierce. I see it. I'm here. Breathe. The room smelled of cedar polish, toner, and citrus cologne. Too clean for what was happening. When the prototype appeared, a guided walkthrough, the cursor moved exactly as Harper's had in Lucas's office hours before. The interface was hers, stripped of imperfections, draped in the company's design system like silk over honest shoulders. Stella narrated with effortless authority. "We considered the frontline user," she said. "We." The pronoun slipped in like a thief through an unlocked door. Questions began. The CFO leaned forward. "Budget impact?" "Minimal," Stella said smoothly. "We cut vanity programs that don't ladder into outcomes. We focus spend. Fewer things done well." A ripple of approving chuckles, the fragrance of conviction leadership loves to wear. The COO asked, "Risk?" "Change fatigue," Stella replied, barely glancing at her notes. "Internal sabotage, legacy stakeholders. We'll need cover and the authority to say no to the easier yes." The words fell from her mouth like pearls on a necklace that wasn't hers to wear. Lucas remained immobile. If he noticed the theft, he didn't show it. If he expected a fight, he didn't demand it. He watched as if measuring a deviation only he could see. A fraction off true north, too subtle to announce to a room trained to ignore nuance. Harper's throat ached around a cry she refused to give. She wasn't at the table. She had no microphone. Voices from the back wall weren't amplified. They were tolerated, if not discarded. She tried to catch Lucas's eye. He didn't look. He was a portrait of control, a weather system contained in a suit. Stella ended with a 90-day burn chart and a polished line. "If this doesn't work, we'll know it honestly. If it does, the silence from our customers will say more than any memo." Silence weighed the performance, then rewarded the safest target. No applause, but chairs relaxed, pens tapped, compliments surfaced. "Elegant," said a director. "Finely focused," murmured another. "I've been saying this for years," joked someone, the kind who always claims foresight. Lucas closed his copy of the deck with meticulous care. "We'll proceed," he said, simple as gravity. "Daily stand-ups at 8:30. Bradford, own the rollout. Team roster by end of day." For Harper, sound ceased. The HVAC, the jets outside, even her pulse, all stopped to mark the phrase, "own the rollout." It spread through her like a bruise blooming under skin. The meeting dissolved into courteous after-chaos, chairs retracting, porcelain scraping, side murmurs. Harper stayed at the back wall, legs too weak for motion. Jordan touched her elbow, once, quick, enough to keep her above water. "Say something," he whispered. Now. Her eyes burned. She could march forward, claim her work. But the old lessons rose in a chorus. Don't make a scene. Don't be the angry woman. Don't be the distraction. She remembered the looks. Is she emotional? She remembered the quiet punishments given to those who embarrassed the wrong person in front of the right ones. Stella approached, coffee cup in hand, smile soft and sharpened. "Harper," she said. "So glad you could sit in. It's invaluable to watch how things land at the executive level." "It landed because it's right," Harper said, steadier than she felt. Stella's eyes glimmered, admiration or calculation, impossible to know. "And it will go farther with alignment," she said. "I'll need your files, the source prototypes. Don't worry, you'll be mentioned." Mentioned? A paperclip where there should have been a lock. Lucas passed close, speaking quietly to the COO. Harper stepped forward. "Mr. Callahan." He paused, turning with the practiced economy of a man who had altered thousands of days this way. "Miss Bennett, those interviews," she said softly. "The prototype, the metrics framework, they're mine." A flicker in his eye. Acknowledgement. "I know," he said. Her chest lurched. "Then why?" "Because you didn't defend it." His voice was even, not unkind, simply factual. "If it mattered that much, you would have fought for it in the room." The words landed clean with the authority of truth, even if truth was cruel. Shame hit mercilessly, not for doing wrong, but for not doing what the world demands of quiet people. He moved on, the conversation resuming 2 steps later. Stella's hand hovered near Harper's arm, comfort just shy of contact. "He respects courage," Stella murmured. "We all do." Harper left before the heat behind her eyes betrayed her. The corridor outside was colder, the glass held the sky like a secret. She pressed the portfolio to her ribs and walked until tile replaced carpet, until elevator doors offered a reflection she didn't want to recognize. Back on 38, the air smelled of burnt coffee and toner, the democracy of small indignities. Harper sat, opened her laptop, and drafted a resignation letter dressed in professionalism that made pain look elegant, concise, gracious, stripped of evidence. She copied HR. She didn't tell Jordan until it was sent, because if she had, he would have said the right things, and she might have listened. He appeared at her desk with eyes that pleaded, "Don't." She shook her head. "I won't let them put my name in a footnote." He didn't argue. He simply stood there while she cleaned a drawer in the silence that comes after a storm, but before the damage is counted. A mug, a jellyfish-covered notepad, a small plant that had survived under fluorescent light. By 4, the sun had softened to gold. Harper walked out through the lobby. The guards nodded. The receptionist offered a sympathetic smile that required no explanation. Outside, the city struck her full in the face. Exhaust fumes, pretzel salt, a taxi horn, laughter from a cafe where someone celebrated a birthday at 2 in the afternoon because their lives allowed it. She walked without destination. Her feet found the river, because water is where people go when they need to hear something bigger than themselves. The pier smelled of diesel and iron, and something cleaner beneath, like old salt in new air. She sat until the cold steadied her bones. She had quit, a sentence as final as a door slamming. Relief rose like a promise, then collapsed into fear. Rent, insurance, the thick file of her mother's medical notes. Numbers marched in her head. Her phone buzzed. An HR confirmation. Another from Stella. "Sad to see you leave during such an important phase. Are you sure?" The falseness made her smile, thin, brittle, gone as soon as it formed. She stared at the water until the sun carved a trail across it. Fear hardened into clarity. "They don't get to tell this story without me." By 6:15, the lobby guard looked surprised to see her return. By 6:17, the elevator reflected a different face. Someone who comes back not to watch a fire, but to rebuild on the ashes. On 38, evening mode had settled in. Softer lights. A cleaning cart rattled citrus down the hall. A few desks glowed with stubborn ambition. Jordan was still there, as if he had never left. He rose at the sight of her. "Good," was already on his lips. "I'm not giving them the prototypes," she said. "I'm not giving them what I made, so they can erase me with it." "You resigned." "I did," she said, "and I'm here." They gathered what mattered. Sketchbooks, annotated printouts, an old hard drive labeled with a date and a self-deprecating joke. They took the ordinary too. A paperclip bent into a fish, receipts from nights Harper had bought coffee for junior designers. She drafted another email, this one to Legal, sterile and crisp, documenting the provenance of interviews and prototypes. Facts are a kindness you give yourself when stories are stolen. Her phone buzzed again, not email. A message. From Lucas Callahan, my office. Now. She stared as if the words were coordinates to a place off any map. Jordan raised his brows. Maybe he wants to fire me, she said. Or to listen, he countered. She said nothing. She put the plant back on her desk, smoothed her dress, and walked to the elevator with borrowed steadiness. The 40th floor at night was another world. Quiet, city lights louder than people. The assistant's desk was empty, neat piles squared to the edge. Lucas's door was ajar. She knocked anyway. Come in. He stood by the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled. The skyline turned his silhouette into a cutout. He didn't invite her to sit. He didn't apologize. He studied her like a forecast. I received your resignation, he said. I know. It was hasty. It was accurate. He held her gaze as if holding could change it. You walked out instead of fighting. I fought, she said, her calm surprising her. I fought at 2 in the morning when I built something no one asked for. I fought when I came to your office and presented it without apology. I fought all day against the part of me that believes if I say my name too loudly in a room like that, I'll be punished for mistaking oxygen for permission. Something flickered in his face, not pity, not softness, but recognition. The kind scars give when they map wounds in familiar places. His words cut with precision. If you want a different outcome, you need a different act. And if you want a different company, she shot back, you need to stop rewarding theft dressed up as alignment. The sentence hung between them like a live wire. Neither moved. A siren wailed far below, then faded like a threat reconsidered. You're valuable here, he said finally. I won't be inventory in someone else's win. He exhaled through his nose, a breath that carved fine lines at his mouth. You can rescind. I could, she said, or you could tell the room whose work they approved. Silence again, thin enough to see through. He turned a folder, set it down, movements small and controlled. If you stay, I'll make sure you're protected. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. Protection isn't credit. He looked at her a long moment. Then, as if surrendering to gravity, he stepped closer. Cedar and starch, and the faint shadow of exhaustion. You're right about the company, he said. But you're wrong about me. The words didn't mean what she wanted them to mean. Before she could answer, he added, My door isn't the room where you should be asking to be seen. Her throat tightened. Then where? In the room that hurts, he said. The one where the people who erase you applaud each other for a job well done. You're telling me to bleed for it. I'm telling you the cost. He stepped back, distance refreezing into corporate weather. Think, he said, soft but unsparing. Night is a poor time to choose a life. She left balancing herself like someone stepping off a moving train. The elevator carried her down past floors of glass brilliance to the more human air of 38, where Jordan waited, where her plant stood in custody, where her resignation sat like a stone in an inbox. She didn't sit. She looked at the email to HR, at the prototypes, at the quiet carves of her effort. The clock clicked to 8:31 with a digital sigh. The cleaning cart squeaked down the hall, then fell still, as if even it were waiting. Harper reached for the mouse. The cursor hovered over her message to Legal, drifted toward the rescind button, then back again, as though pulled by an unseen current. Behind her the elevator chimed, soft footsteps, the whisper of perfume that had opened the day and seemed determined to close it. Working late. Stella's voice, elegant as a glove. Harper didn't turn. Not yet. Her hand stilled over the mouse. The city pressed its forehead against the glass and listened. The plant on her desk reached toward a light that wasn't there, and for one breath, holding an entire future inside it, no one moved at all. By Friday night, as frost powdered Midtown and the sky settled into a bruised violet, the annual Callahan Enterprises Gala rose like a temporary palace inside the Whitmore Hotel. Chandeliers dripped with crystal, velvet hushed the marble floors, and a quartet pressed careful notes into the air like silver pins. If the executive conference room had its own weather, this place had its own climate system, warm enough to soften spines, bright enough to polish reputations, and loud enough with money to drown out small truths. Harper lingered at the entrance, watching the evening arrange itself. Guests glided up the steps in black-tie certainty, men in tuxedos, carrying the faint scent of cologne and optimism, women in gowns that moved like whispered secrets. Waiters cut diagonals through the room with trays of champagne that seemed to glow on their own. Somewhere, ice cracked in a glass. Somewhere else, laughter feathered into the air and dissolved. She brushed her hand against the zipper at her back, checking that the armor held. The dress was black, true black, not the soft diplomatic kind. Clean lines, square neckline, sleeves to the wrist, a skirt that trusted her to carry it without theatrics. Her hair was swept into a low, simple knot. At her ears, small onyx studs caught only the light that came searching. If elegance had a prayer, it was not to be seen first, but to be seen correctly. "Harper," Jordan whispered as he reached her, eyes wide in the good way and the protective one. His bow tie sat slightly crooked, charmingly human among so much polished perfection. If justice had eyes, they'd be blinking. She smiled, quick and warm, making room for courage. "Don't look at me like I'm a miracle. I'm just here." "You're exactly here." He tapped his temple. "And so is every person who ever wondered if they could walk back in and still belong." A photographer's flash burst. An artificial sun. The VP of strategy laughed with teeth too white. Stella appeared at the top of the staircase like the hour striking on a clock. Satin white gown, hair smoothed into a mirror, a diamond line at her throat winking with opinions. She descended in perfect time, every step a note in her song of inevitability. "I shouldn't be here," Harper murmured, and realized it wasn't true. The company had mailed her invitation weeks ago. Before resignations, reversals, and shifting tides, the gala wasn't a departmental event. It was a temple. Tonight, she would choose what to lay on its altar. The room accepted her. People looked, then looked again. Some with surprise, some with the quick math of social risk, some with that small human bloom of admiration that grows beside envy like twins who chose different names. More than one executive nodded the kind of nod that meant, "I've heard your name lately, and I'll use it if it suits me." At the bar, she accepted sparkling water with lime, the glass sweating delicately against her glove. Tiny storms fizzed on her tongue. The buzz of the room, music, chatter, clinking crystal, seemed to hum in her teeth. Jordan drifted off to intercept a data lead. Harper stepped to the mezzanine rail. Below, the city flared, cars strung in red lines, pedestrians scattered like black commas, the river exhaling in the dark. "Miss Bennet!" Not loud, not warm, recognition wrapped in discipline. Lucas Callahan wore the evening as if it had been tailored for him. The tuxedo was severe enough to be honest, satin lapels, swallowing light and returning only in tension. Gravity seemed to bend toward him. For a second, Harper remembered the boardroom afternoon, his surgical sentence, his fact dressed as insult. And then the sight of him rewrote the memory into something less certain. "Mr. Callahan," she said, measuring each word so the glass in her hand wouldn't tremble. "Thank you for the invitation." He took in her dress, the way an architect measures a line that balances stress with beauty, not lingering, registering. "You're welcome." His eyes flicked to the room. "Will you join me at dinner?" It should have sounded like a request. It landed like a decision already written on a calendar. She nodded. Inside, a flock of restless birds beat their wings against her ribs. She followed him, and the night changed temperature. The banquet space was a cathedral of light. Round tables draped in white linen, candles shivering in crystal, place cards committing names to porcelain, as if to say, "You belong here because we wrote it down." Violins threaded a melody so distilled it felt pure. At a table near the dais, Lucas indicated the empty chair at his right. Board members, department heads, hedge fund whisperers. Stella's profile caught the candlelight from across the table, turning it into ice. Conversation folded to include Harper. Compliments bloomed like hothouse flowers. Pretty, controlled, bred to survive rooms like this. I hear your fingerprints are on a few promising things," said a director whose cufflinks could have bought an apartment. "She has a good eye for what people need," Lucas said, not looking at her, not looking at anyone, just setting the truth on the table like cutlery. If gratitude had a taste, it was copper. If fear had one, it was salt. Harper kept both to herself. "I listen well," she said. "The rest is practice." Courses came and went, scallop on pale puree, duck breast with lacquered skin, tart cherry cutting through richness like a midnight decision. Stella's gaze was priestly, watching for cracks in faith. "Brava on the transformation initiative," a board member told her. Stella lowered her lashes. "We have exceptional people putting skin in the game. Some of them do their best work where no one sees." The compliment dangled like a jewel above a closed fist. Harper's spine heated, then cooled. Lucas's knife clicked gently on porcelain, louder in her head than the quartet. Dessert arrived, chocolate citrus, the soft sugar of congratulations. Through it all, something uncoiled between Harper and Lucas. Not safety, not danger, but the charge that arcs from storm to steeple. He asked her nothing personal, everything essential. "What failure taught you most?" he asked over the rim of his glass. "The one where I pretended it didn't hurt," she said. "And what did you do differently next time?" I said my name out loud. He nodded once, a metronome concluding a measure. After plates cleared, the host invited the room to the dance floor. Couples migrated like birds. Lucas stood. "Walk with me." They reached the edge. The music hovered, restrained, unapologetic. He offered his hand. She placed hers in it, and the contact was quiet logic, like a key turning. He was precise, not flashy. A man who knew space and angles, who guided without insistence. She followed with the strength of someone who knows surrender is not weakness. The satin at his lapel brushed her knuckles. Heat, waiting. "Why did you come tonight?" he asked, a question disguised as small talk. "To see who I am when the room is gilded," she said, "and to let the room see me back." "And who are you?" "Not inventory," she answered. The vow landed between them. They turned. City lights gleamed through the windows. The air smelled of beeswax, champagne, violets and iron. "You look different," he said. "I feel the same." "That's not what I meant." A pivot. A lock of hair slipped loose. His gaze paused there, not possessive, just present. They moved closer. The room blurred into silhouettes. She almost kissed him. He stepped back half an inch. The world returned by degrees. She breathed again, violets in her lungs. "Harper," Stella's voice cut in, elegant as glass. "You're luminous tonight. Lucas, we need you for the donor introduction." Lucas released Harper's hand slowly, gaze fixed on her like committing to a private archive. "Excuse me," he said, not asking. "Of course." Stella's smile slid back to Harper. "We must catch up later. I've been thinking about how to position your recent contributions." "Position them where?" Harper asked, not sweet. "In the story the company tells about itself. Narratives need shapes. I'd hate for yours to get trimmed by accident." "I'd hate for it to be trimmed on purpose," Stella's eyes glittered like diamond dust, remembering it was once stone. "Then we'll both be careful." Lucas spoke from the dais, thanking donors with the same economy he used to praise work. Harper drifted to the ballroom's edge, marble cool under her shoes. She sipped water she didn't need, tasting his thumb on her mouth like a secret she'd promised not to tell herself. Jordan reappeared, eyebrows spelling well, alive. "Alive," she whispered, laughing once, "and inconveniently mortal." "On brand," he said. "You were seen." "By some." Her eyes stayed on Lucas. "By others, I was assessed." "Assessment is a kind of seeing," Jordan said, "just not the kind that stays." Later, Lucas found her without seeming to search. "There's a car waiting," he said, pitched low enough for her alone. "Let me take you home." She should have refused. She nodded instead, as if agreeing to the weather. Outside, the cold bit again. The town car exhaled steam at the curb. Inside, leather, heat, neon, sliding into watercolor. For a few blocks, silence pressed, rather than emptied. Harper exhaled. It shook. "You confuse me," she said, eyes on the glass. "That seems to be a theme," he answered. "Me and rooms." "I dreamed about you," she admitted softly, ridiculous and therefore true. "I don't know when it started. I know it didn't help." He didn't laugh, didn't reassure. He looked at the dark glass as if it might answer. "I hope," he said, "that in your dreams I wasn't wearing pink." An earthquake in a single line. She turned to him as if facing an ocean. The message. He had read it. Not the slides, not the polished arguments, the unwound, hungry human string of her. Heat flooded her face. A soft sound escaped her, open, startled, like the O people make when they see a meteor and know it's vanishing. He didn't touch her. He didn't apologize. He let the fact exist between them like a lit match. The car slowed at a red light. On the sidewalk, a couple argued, then kissed. In the back seat, a woman in black and a man in black sat in a dangerous, fragile quiet. Harper wet her lip. The ghost of Cherry lingered. The car idled like a pulse, deciding whether to quicken. "Lucas," she began, and the sentence she was building reached for a place her courage hadn't lived in for years. When a horn split the night cleanly in two, the light turned green, and the city rolled forward, refusing to wait for anyone's decision. The sentence detonated softly and kept echoing. "I hope," Lucas said, almost conversational, "that in your dreams I wasn't wearing pink." Harper didn't answer right away. The car's interior absorbed the aftershock, leather swallowing sound the way snow swallows footsteps. Outside, the city unspooled in streaks of neon and squares of light. Half-closed storefronts, buses with weary faces, strangers crossing under their own small weathers. Inside, the air turned thin, intimate, as if someone had cracked a window onto the truth and then thought better of it. He had read it. The late-night message meant for Jordan. The not-quite confession, more like a leak in the dam she rebuilt every morning. He knew about the loneliness, the hunger, the absurd pink object she joked about so she wouldn't cry about. He knew the part of her that didn't belong in a boardroom, but had stumbled into one anyway, only to be mocked by fate. She looked at him the way people look at cliffs, calculating height, wind, and the strength of their ankles. "So you saw it," she said at last, her voice steady. The steadiness of someone who's already lost the thing they feared losing and is now free to be exact. "I did." His gaze stayed forward. Passing lights woke and died across his profile. "I wasn't meant to." "No," she agreed. "You weren't." The driver took a left onto a wider avenue. Tires whispered over painted lines. Harper folded her hands in her lap to keep them from betraying the electricity crawling over her skin. She didn't feel embarrassed. She felt endangered by honesty and therefore obligated to it. "I'm not sure what humiliates me more," she said with a small smile that had nothing to do with humor. "The fact that I was exhausted enough to put desire in a company chat, or that I gave a toy a name like it was Employee of the Month. In the rearview mirror, the driver stayed stone, eyes fixed on the respectful know-where drivers go to survive other people's lives. Lucas didn't smile. "You named it," he said simply, "because you were alone." She could have deflected. She could have wrapped the word in velvet and called it something else. Instead, she nodded. "Alone is cheaper," she said. "It doesn't argue ghost or make you wonder if you imagined the whole thing, but it's also—" She gestured toward the window at the city that didn't know she existed. "Unsustainable." They passed a laundromat glowing under fluorescent mercy. A man pushed a stroller with a sleeping child, wrapped like an expensive secret. Life went on with its small devotions, while two people sat in a black car, trying not to rewrite themselves. "I dreamed about you," she said, softer than she intended, as though setting down something fragile that might resent being handled too firmly. Not the kind of dream that rescues anyone. The kind that makes the room look different in the morning, because it knows what you did. "Harper," he said her name like a caution and a question. "I'm not asking for anything." She lifted a hand palm inward, as if instructing her own heart not to run into traffic. "I'm just trying to stop lying to myself. I can't tell if you're the storm or the shelter from it. Some days you feel like both." The car slowed under an elevated track. Steel ribs crisscrossed overhead like a cathedral built for machines. He turned toward her, shadow and jawline shifting. "You think I'm safety?" "I think you are discipline," she said. "And discipline sometimes looks like safety until it decides it's also a weapon." He accepted it without agreement. "You're projecting." "Probably," she said. "We all bring our own ghost to the party and pray the music's loud enough." She exhaled. The sequined night thinned into ordinary blocks. "You didn't mention the message yesterday, or today. You gave me access, and then you let someone steal it in the room. I can't tell if that's cruelty or strategy." "That's a false choice." "Then give me another." He folded his hands loosely, cuff exactly where it should be. "I gave you the meeting because of your work, not your message. I didn't mention the message because I don't discuss personal matters with employees. Except when the personal matter is me," she said, not sharp, just true. He didn't argue. "As for the room—" He paused, choosing instead of defaulting. "You misread me. I don't rescue people in public. It only teaches the room who to destroy next time. And in private? In private, I ask if they're willing to make the room uncomfortable." She gave a soft laugh. One syllable, no mirth. "So, I should have burned?" "I'm telling you," he said quietly, "that courage is the only currency that holds its value in there. And mercy has to be smuggled." Silence followed, heavy with words not yet chosen. Outside, a deli clerk hosed down a sidewalk that refused to be clean. A woman in a red coat chased a bus she missed anyway. The city stayed biblical in its indifference. "You asked me for names," Harper said, "and you told me I'd have authority. Then you handed ownership to someone who steals breath from other people's throats. You think I didn't see it? I think you allowed it." "I allowed it because power is a tide," he said. "Not defensive, just mapping. You don't reverse it by shouting at waves. You build a wall under the surface and let the water discover it can't go where it used to. If I had corrected Bradford, I would have rescued you and taught them to ignore you. I'd rather make them depend on you." Her irritation and admiration collided, sparking. "You're asking me to be holy about the politics of my own erasure. I'm asking you to decide on the terms you can live with." The car's heater breathed warm air onto her bare arms. She rubbed a small circle on her wrist, grounding herself. The Gala's laughter still clung to her hair like static. The memory of his thumb at her mouth felt indecent now, under street lamps. "I should be furious with you," she said. "I should get out, call a cab, and send you a letter with signatures and copies and a very polite fire in it. But you're here. But I'm here, she echoed, because if I leave now, the story hardens in the wrong shape. And because... She stopped. The sentence walked to a cliff. Because? His voice was careful, surgical. She swallowed. Because I don't know how to want something and survive it at the same time. The car idled at a red. On the corner, two teenagers laughed like a spell against sorrow. In the dim, his eyes found hers. The distance between them was measurable by breath. You want your work to be yours, he said. I want to be mine, she corrected. His mouth shifted. Maybe a yes, maybe a decade of unsaid things. We can write new terms. We? Her eyebrow lifted, the word a small bridge across a ravine. I can create conditions. You can choose to step into them, or not. Conditions, she repeated. Is that your word for care? It's my word for the only care I'm built to offer. He didn't soften it. What do your conditions look like? Clear lanes, credit tracked in public, meetings where you speak first, meetings you walk out of if credit shifts to the wrong mouth, a team you choose, daily stand-ups that aren't theater, and distance, she blinked. Distance. You don't report to me directly, he said, but you work inside my weather. If we cross lines, we both lose the room. You more than me. You're saying if I want to build, I can't. She gestured between them. I'm saying if I respect your work, I don't seduce the person doing it. Heat climbed her chest. 10 responses clamored. Yes, don't flatter yourself. Kiss me, disappear. She chose none. Is that what you want, distance? I want what survives daylight. And if what I want is mess, then you want a different life, he said. Maybe a different man. She leaned back, watching him the way people watch a storm front split the sky. You talk like policy. I think like policy, he admitted. It's how I keep cities from falling on my head. Does it keep you warm? No. Something cracked then, not because he wanted it to, but because truth outweighs pretense, and the night had carried too much already. For a moment, she felt the ache of him, this meticulously engineered weather system of a man who knew how to keep buildings alive, but not how to hold someone in a kitchen at 3 a.m., with only the light above the sink for company. I told you confuse me, she said lightly, to mask the weight. This isn't helping. Good, he said, surprising her. Confusion is where we stop lying and start choosing. The driver eased onto a quiet street. Brownstones lined up like patient elders. The car slowed before her building, the cracked stoop and marble entry remembering grander days. The car didn't pull to the curb yet. They sat back a few yards, engine humming, blood doing the same. She glanced up at her window, 3rd floor, second from the fire escape. Empty now, but somehow still present. Say it, Lucas said. Say what? The thing you almost said twice, then stepped back from. She stared at her reflection in the glass. She could see it. The sentence that would change the car's temperature. The world that might not bend to hold it. The aftermath she'd have to live with. She could see the risk, humiliation if it went wrong, irreparable intimacy if it went right. She looked at him. I am falling, she said, each word deliberate. Not in a way that flatters anyone, in the way that terrifies me. And if you are not, if your policy, if your weather, if your geometry, tell me now, so I can break in ways that heal straight. He closed his eyes once, absorbing impact. You deserve better than a man who learned love as a negotiation with disaster, he said. That's not an answer. It's the closest I have that won't lie. The car pulled to the curb. The driver's eyes stayed professionally blind. Upstairs, a neighbor's radio toyed with a Motown hook that believed in second chances. Do you want me to come up? Lucas asked. Not seduction. A question with the cost printed on the tag. She laughed, cracked, then mended. I don't know what I want with you. I only know I want to stop being small. Then don't be. I won't. The vow didn't require him. Her hand hovered on the door handle, trembling chrome turning liquid. She turned back, Not for permission, not for comfort, but for the impossible. A world where work, room, and wanting could be managed by someone who knew more than survival. He was watching, unblinking. "I won't take what you haven't named." "So what do we call this?" she asked, almost smiling. Not yet. Cold air slipped in as she cracked the door. Somewhere above, a window opened. Somewhere below, a cat melted into darkness. She held there, balanced in the narrow space where decisions become gravity. "Harper," Lucas said, not loud, not soft. She paused. "Tomorrow." A word that could be mercy, challenge, or hinge. She looked up at the third-floor window that knew her name. Back at the man who didn't pretend he could save her from rooms he wouldn't dismantle. She breathed in air cold enough to make honesty visible. And then, without stepping out, without stepping back, she held there undecided as the night leaned close to hear which way her life would turn. Morning arrived with a taste of metal. The sky over Manhattan was flat gray, like the inside of a pocket where light goes to be forgotten. Inside Callahan Enterprises, the air felt 2 degrees colder than usual, as if the building had inhaled and refused to exhale. Keycards flashed red, then green. Elevators chimed with the politeness of machines that didn't mind carrying dread as cargo. Wordless currents moved through the corridors, heads bending together a fraction, people typing faster without getting more done. Harper felt it before anyone said it. She heard it in the copy room, where the printer coughed out a sheet, then jammed, an unimportant failure that somehow sounded like a verdict. She smelled it in the air. Toner, burnt coffee, the anxious bite of cologne applied too heavily. She saw it in the way a junior analyst looked up at her, then quickly away, as if eye contact might be misinterpreted by the gods. Her inbox was a field of flags. Meeting moved, meeting cancelled. New meeting, emergency 9:15, 41st floor, product plus legal plus security. The subject line carried a red exclamation mark, fuel for a managerial culture that secretly loved them. Jordan slid into her peripheral vision like noise-cancelling noise. His face held the pallor of late nights plus bad news. "Don't panic," he said, which is what people say only when panic has already found a chair. "There's chatter." "What kind?" He lowered his voice. Instinct, not theater. "A leak. Competitor dropped a teaser at 7 a.m. A feature map that looks like your pilot." Her heart didn't drop. It calcified. "Which competitor?" "Talkware." The name scraped her nerves. Talkware, the rival that smiled in investor decks and stole oxygen in markets where oxygen was expensive. Jordan swallowed. "And full disclosure, Devon's there now." Devon, the executive dating Jordan, with whom she had shared civilized dinners, indelicate laughter, and the kind of modern boundary lines people draw and then trip over anyway. "Devon," she repeated, the syllables weightless and then suddenly too heavy. "He moved into strategy last quarter," Jordan said, eyes steady on hers. "I'm telling you because someone else will tell it wrong." Harper nodded once, the motion of someone placing a plate carefully onto a stack so nothing would break too loudly. "Let's go." The 41st floor war room was already filled. Directors, VPs, legal, security, Stella at the front in winter white with a thin black belt that suggested both fashion and leashes. The wall of screens glared, one showing Talkware's teaser glossy and slick, one displaying internal logs, one frozen on a legal slide full of sentences that could serve as either knives or shields. Lucas entered without fanfare. The room's pitch dropped half a note. He didn't sit. He scanned the screens, then the people, as if inventorying both for lies and oxygen. "Let's begin," he said. The VP of Security gestured to the video. Talkware published a preview at 7:03. Core mechanics map directly to Project Lattice. Different names, but the flow's too close. Their code references a new telemetry pipeline. Timing suggests accelerated work. "Accelerated off what?" Legal murmured. scribbling notes in the margin of a pre-printed threat assessment. Stella's posture said, "I told you so." "Do we have exposure?" Lucas asked. "Enough," security said. "We briefed pods, circulated an early deck to 4 directors, 2 SVPs. He let the pause hang like a blade. "Bradford's council saw a trimmed version yesterday. Sanitized for governance," Stella said smoothly. "Nothing proprietary." "Then how," Lucas asked, "do they have our bones?" Silence spread like frost. Harper spoke before she could weigh optics. "Our bones were visible. Philosophy isn't protected, but the flow, the friction points we targeted, appear here," security cut in, pointing to a paused frame. The mock-up looked unsettlingly like Harper's midnight Figma draft, only glossed, branded, sung in a key the market preferred. A director cleared his throat in the way men do when they want to be minor characters in major scenes. "We should assume a leak," he declared, as if naming it made him useful. Stella's gaze swept the room and stopped on Harper. "We need to examine proximity," she said. Honey poured over antiseptic. "Access plus incentive creates risk." The wire snapped across the room. Harper kept her face still. Jordan's breath behind her was too fast. "Incentive?" she asked. "Relationships," Stella said gently. "Unintended loyalties. Individuals who may not realize their legal cut in, bureaucracy offering mercy. No allegations in open session. We'll collect devices, review access. We'll face customers," Lucas said, overriding. His eyes locked on Harper. "Bennett, how fast can you publish a statement on our priorities without referencing talkware?" Her throat tightened. She was still recalibrating to a math problem where she had become the variable. "An hour," she said. 15 minutes for a draft." 10. "Not cruelty, gravity." She nodded. Stella cleared her throat. "Before we use Miss Bennett as messenger, we should consider perception." "Apologies, Harper, but Jordan's partner is—" "My private life isn't part of this," Harper said softly, because louder would have broken her. "It is, if it creates conflict," Stella replied just as softly. "Talkware benefits from our thinking. You have proximity to someone who works there. Optics matter." A murmur rippled. Lucas didn't stop it. He let it measure the room. Legal exhaled. "Pending investigation, we recommend administrative leave for any employees with direct access whose proximity introduces risk." Harper heard it as if underwater. "Say it," she whispered. "Not to legal, not to Stella, but to the idea itself. You're saying suspend me." "We're saying protect the company," Stella finished. Jordan stepped forward. "Harper would rather break her own work than share it with anyone who doesn't deserve it." "Ask me how I know." "Mr.?" security asked. "Jordan Hale. Data science. And her friend." "We'll handle internal relationships offline," Stella said coolly. "This isn't a moral judgment, Harper. It's prudence." Harper looked at Lucas. He met her gaze, unblinking. "I don't rescue in public." "Pending forensics," he said. "Harper Bennett is on administrative leave, effective immediately." The sentence was clean surgery. The blood spilled elsewhere. "Understood," she said. The word tasted like enamel. "And draft the statement before you leave," Lucas added, which might have been cruelty or the closest thing to apology he knew. Her fingers found the keyboard like instinct. The manifesto disguised as update wrote itself. Customers first, relief over applause, clarity over theatre. She sent it to communications, to Lucas, not to Stella. It waited by her desk. She handed over the laptop, signed the receipt, packed a notepad, a pen, the photocopy of her mother. Jordan carried the plant. "Say it wasn't Devon," he said in the elevator. "I don't think he would, but the world is full of things I didn't think would happen." His eyes shone. "I love you, not like that, in the way that says, don't let them make you smaller." "I won't," she said. She felt precise, not large. The lobby guard nodded with professional sorrow. Outside, the city met her with cold air that tasted like pennies and exhaust. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Evelyn Cho, Talkware Legal," the voice said. "Our build predates your pilot. Off the record, people will stand on your throat if you let them. Don't give them your neck." The line clicked. Another buzz. "Lucas." "Where are you?" he asked. "Leaving." "Come upstairs." "I've been suspended." "Come upstairs." His office was colder than the city. He stood behind his desk, sleeves rolled, the skyline a dull sword. "Forensics will clear you," he said. "Or not. The work is bigger than the rumor." "I don't need absolution," she replied. "I need truth to stop being outvoted." He studied her, then looked past her like measuring wind. "I didn't protect you in the room." "No. I won't promise protection I can't deliver. I can promise pressure, quietly. You told me to make the room uncomfortable," she said. "And when it hurt, you told me to admire the architecture." His jaw flexed. "I told you to survive it. There's a difference." Survival is a low bar. Something raw shifted behind his eyes. "Then raise it." "I'm not your enemy, I'm—" He stopped. "A constraint. Some constraints save, some cage." She nodded once. "Go home," he said softly. "Be with your mother. I'll have answers by morning." Answers aren't repairs. No, repairs come later. At the door, he added, "Don't disappear." She looked back. "I don't know how." At home, the suitcase opened like a wound. Sweaters, jeans, the cedar scarf. Jordan's text, "I'm sorry for the world." Her reply, "I'll be gone a few days." His, "Bring me back something green." The apartment breathed. The missing plant left more space for light. Then her phone buzzed again. A screenshot, a forwarded calendar invite, shadow map, CE parity, timestamp 2 days ago. Attachment, lattice, whip V3. Her breath caught. Another message followed. No words, just a question mark. She stood with one hand on the suitcase, one on the knob, toggling the light off, then on again. Between Vermont and the breadcrumb, between retreat and fire. Between silence and a story that would not write itself. The city pressed its ear to her door, waiting to hear which choice she would make. The apartment smelled faintly of cedar and old coffee, the kind of scent that clings to walls after a long winter. Evening had drawn a charcoal line around the windows, and the radiator hissed in the corner like a crook confessing without meaning to. Harper's suitcase lay open on the bed, sweaters rolled into obedient cylinders, jeans folded with military precision, the Vermont scarf pulled from the back of a drawer, still breathing pine. She moved in tight, efficient arcs, a woman assembling a life that could be carried. Outside, sirens braided through the city's breath. Inside, the only sounds were small, the drag of a zipper, the hollow clack of bottles against plastic, a spoon settling in a sink. She'd taken the grocery post-it from the fridge and slipped it into the suitcase's front pocket, as if a list could serve as a talisman. Granola for Mom, a sacred errand disguised as an ordinary one. Her phone showed a train ticket for dawn. The clock showed too early to sleep, too late to reason with the day's injuries. She folded the scarf again, tighter this time, as if neat corners could contain humiliation. Stella's eyes, the council room, the word leave delivered like virtue. Lucas's voice calm and unbending, pending forensics, administrative leave. The memory returned like a surgical cut, bleeding beneath skin where no one could see. A knock touched the door, 2 precise taps that sounded like intention, not courtesy. She froze. No one who loved her knocked like that. 3 steps carried her to the peephole. The hallway light drew a thin gold bar across the floorboards. She leaned close, and the present rearranged itself. Lucas Callahan stood there, jacket open, tie loosened, as if the day had tried to strangle him and he'd refused permission. He didn't fidget or pace. He stood the way a verdict stands, certain of its own weight. Harper's breath snagged on Fear's smallest bone. Her palm pressed flat to the door until the wood cooled the heat in her hand. She could not let the building's weather into her home. She unlocked the chain anyway. The door opened onto the narrow interval between lives. He took her in, black t-shirt under a half-undone shirt, sleeves rolled to the wrist, fatigue engraved instead of wrinkled. The hall behind him smelled of bleach and take-out noodles. A neighbor's TV murmured the promise of a prize. "Don't," she said, the word a shield, not a greeting. "Whatever you came to say, don't." "I came to listen," he said. "You issued a sentence," she shot back, stepping aside but leaving the doorway open as if hospitality itself were a trap. "Listening is just prelude to judgment when you do it." He entered with the carefulness of a man taught to respect expensive hinges. His eyes scanned the apartment like a map. The absent plant on the windowsill was a wound disguised as healing. The suitcase on the bed was a proclamation. "You're leaving," he said. "Perceptive," she replied, hating the bitterness because it tasted like herself. "Vermont, my mother." He nodded once. "Good. Go." The assent felt both like a slap and a blessing. She crossed her arms to keep her ribs in place. "You don't get to approve my escape." "I don't," he said, "but I can refuse to be the reason you don't." Heat, then cold, then heat again. Weather she hadn't agreed to host. She dropped socks into the suitcase as if they were relics. "Why are you here?" "To return what I took," he said. Her head snapped up. "Which part? My name in the room? My place at a table I built? My right to stand in my own work?" His jaw tightened. "The certainty that I'll always choose the building over the human in front of me." A beat. "I won't always," she laughed once, sharp, joyless. "You chose today." "I chose delay today," he said, "to avoid a show trial that keeps you dependent on my protection." "You came here to dress abandonment as strategy?" Her voice cracked, then steadied. "You want me to thank you for throwing me to the wolves as some kind of vaccine?" "I came because you were bleeding and pretending not to," he said, still soft but not apologetic. "And because I needed to hear the part you didn't say in the car." "Which part?" She spread her hands. "That my thoughts about you are a traffic jam where all the lights turned green. That I don't work for you anymore?" Her voice climbed, then reined itself back. "Let's be clear. You think your restraint is mercy. It isn't. It's control painted white." Something moved in his eyes, recognition, refusal, then something dangerous, consideration. "Tell me what you need from me," he said. "I need you out of my kitchen." He nodded, said nothing, waited. That undid her more than any argument could have. She touched a glass, then set it down before her hand betrayed her. "You make me bad," she whispered, surprised at the accuracy. Small and loud at the same time. "I don't like that woman. And I don't work for you anymore." "You never worked for me," he said evenly. "You worked near me. Proximity confused both of us." "Confused?" She laughed bitterly. "I don't need vocabulary. I need a boundary." "Then set one," he said. Her throat burned. She pointed at the door. "Boundary." He didn't move. His gaze fell to the suitcase, the folded scarf, geometry of a pilgrimage. "You're running." "I'm protecting what's left of me," she said. "If that looks like running, that's because you've never had to pack a carry-on and smile for a mother who needs you." His head lifted, clean and sharp. The air went quiet but for the radiator's hiss and a neighbor's bass line thumping like a distant pulse. "I spoke to legal after you left," he said. "Congratulations," she muttered. "Did they absolve you of conscience?" "They found early evidence, log trails, timestamps. The leak didn't come from your credentials." For a second the floor tilted. Her nails wrote truths into her palms. "Then unsuspend me." "Tomorrow," he said, publicly. The word found her softness and exploited it. She hated that it did. "And Stella?" "Her calculus is ending." You say that like a weather report. Chance of consequences, storm front approaching. Harper. The sound of her name in his voice softened her rails. I'm not asking forgiveness. I'm asking for precision. You told me in the car you wanted to stop being small. I'm telling you, the room won't make you large, only you will. That belongs on a plaque in the lobby, she said, sarcasm dulled by relief trying to stand up. He stepped closer, just enough that his nearness registered as truth. The hairs at her nape stood in counsel. Say the other thing, he said, the thing you swallowed on the curb. Her eyes held his. You confuse me, she said, calmer now, the word a bridge instead of a blade. I am falling, and I don't trust what I want around you. I don't trust what you want around me. He exhaled, something like surrender, but trained never to show it. I want not to hurt you, he said, which isn't the same as promising I can't. Not a comfort, she said, but it was, a little. He glanced at the counter, back to her. May I sit? No, she said. A man at her kitchen table would rewrite her house. He didn't. He placed his palms on the back of a chair, ballast chosen. When you come back, he said, the team will be yours. Your name signed, not mentioned. When I come back, she echoed, you assume I will. No, he said, and for the first time the steel thinned. I'm asking. He crossed the distance openly. Air shifted. She held her ground. His hand rose slowly, permission in the slowness, fingertips brushing a stray strand clinging to her cheek. Don't, she said, but it was plea, not command. He stopped. The space hummed. Every time I see you, he said, unarmored, I hear the sound that lives under silence. Tell me to leave. I did, she said, but not with the mouth truth uses. The kiss came anyway, not a question, not an answer, two disciplines failing at once. His hand framed her jaw with ritual care. She leaned in, giving voice to all the unsent drafts, the unpaid hours. The suitcase bore witness, the scarf whispered against the duvet. He pulled back just enough to breathe. His forehead rested against hers, heavier than the kiss itself. Tell me to go, he said again. Go, she whispered, the word breaking even as she shaped it. Please. He obeyed, mercy and restraint. At the door he paused. When you're ready, he said, I'll be where I've always been. Not enough, and still here. Don't say that, she whispered. It makes me believe in a version of you that can't clock in. His mouth almost bent toward a smile, then didn't. I'll fix what I can, he said, and stop pretending I can fix what I can't. Start with me, she said. He understood. He left. The door closed with the dignity of old wood. She sat on the bed and let 3 clean tears escape, not for him, not for the company, but for the version of herself that kept surviving and had never been thanked. Later, she found the faded Vermont receipt tucked into her scarf, proof that leaving and returning are the same verb in different tense. Her phone buzzed. Check your email. Subject, shadow map, the forwarded invite, the attachment, careless bravado in the replies. The breadcrumb had become bread. She looked at the suitcase, at the door, at the ghost of his kiss, at the gravity of her mother's scan. At the life someone was trying to steal. Gravity, she realized, is not singular. It's a parliament. The radiator sighed. A train called the horizon. Harper stood, breathing steady. She left the suitcase open, slid her phone into her coat, turned off the lamp and touched the knob. She didn't turn it. Not yet. Outside, a siren braided with another. The city held its breath, waiting to see who she would be when the hinge finally moved. Vermont wore February like an old wool coat, rough, honest, warmer than it looked. The sky stretched low and unadorned, a pewter bowl over hills patched with winter browns and the stubborn green of pine. Harper arrived on a Wednesday that smelled of wood smoke and diesel, snow receding in thin rinds along fence posts, the road home tamped flat by practical tires. The first thing she noticed was the quiet. Not the absence of sound, Vermont had its own orchestra, but the absence of chatter. No sirens, no elevator chimes, no keycard beeps. Instead, crows arguing like old jurors, the creak of a farmhouse exhaling into the afternoon, her mother humming a hymn in a register nostalgia keeps polished. The Bennett farmhouse leaned into its yard like a conspirator. Inside, the air carried the layered scent of making do, bar soap, coffee from a dented percolator, beeswax rubbed into wood worn smooth by touch. "Baby," her mother said, both greeting and absolution. Elaine Bennett's eyes were the color of late summer lake water, her hair silver as frost. Her voice, once the loudest laughter in a room, now tempered into gentleness without surrender. The scan was tomorrow. Notes on the fridge laid out an itinerary of bravery. Insurance numbers, appointment times, nurses' names written like talismans. Harper hugged her, and the geometry of home reassembled around them. They fell into rhythms, old houses remember. Mornings with oatmeal and local news, maple yields, snowstorms, the occasional half-minute about companies made of glass. Afternoons with errands measured to medications' rise and fall, a stop at the general store where gossip stuck to the air like sugar. Evenings with soup, blankets that knew their knees, old records whispering through speakers that should have broken years ago. The kitchen radiator hissed like a cat that loved you anyway. "It's good you're here," Elaine said, not because she needed Harper, but because she wanted her. "The vines will wake up soon." She meant the old vineyard out back, survivors of her father's experiment. Wine grapes coaxed from Vermont soil with prayer, science, and ledgers that never balanced. Harper slept in her childhood room. Tin stars still hung in the constellation she had once invented for herself, a map to a future where she didn't have to beg to be seen. The city receded. Her phone dimmed into a tool rather than an altar. Jordan texted mornings, "I miss your coffee critiques," and nights, "Devon says talk where legal is feral but factual. I can't tell if that helps." And she replied with the economy of someone saving tenderness for her mother, herself, and the world as it shows up when no one is performing. 2 weeks passed in this slow grammar. The scan came and went with relief that tasted like cold water. No new shadows. They celebrated with skillet-wide pancakes and bacon that sang in cast iron. On the drive home, snow fell like a confident lie, then quit by afternoon, leaving the fields marked with quotation stripes of white. Harper breathed. Her body remembered rest. On the 14th morning, the world shifted, uncaring about her sleep. The percolator burbled. Her phone chimed. Subject: internal statement, integrity and attribution from Office of the CEO. She didn't open it at the counter. She poured coffee for her mother, sat, and let her hand tremble. "Go on," Elaine said. Invitation, vote of confidence. The email was short. They always were from him. It named a fact without flattery. A review had uncovered unauthorized appropriation of work and confidentiality violations tied to Project Lattice. No competitor named. No shadows, only light. Personnel changes announced in weather advisory language. A sharp, spare affirmation that credit would be restored. At the end, special acknowledgement to Harper Bennett for foundational research and design direction. She read it twice, a third time. To be sure, her name stayed paired with foundational. Her throat caught. Elaine squeezed her hand hard enough to remind her body of itself. "That man," Elaine said, refusing him the intimacy of his name, "knows how to put words where they belong." Harper didn't answer. Another email blinked. "Jordan. Bomb dropped. You should see Stella's face. No, don't. Don't give her your eyes." Then a screenshot. Internal chat lighting up. Applause emojis like confessionals. private truths pulled into public air. By noon, details came piecemeal, the way news always does. Stella and an ally had built a shadow pipeline, files collected for governance, sanded into executive-safe language, then presented as leadership. The breadcrumb Harper had been sent, lattice, whip v3, tied to a private archive with too many fingerprints, the most damning used after hours. Whether arrogance or incompetence, the logs bloomed like lichen under the right light. HR became theatre. Security became shore patrol. Stella's exit was phrased as a mutual parting to pursue opportunities aligned with her strengths. The building knew better. By 11 a.m., an all-hands streamed. Lucas stood at a lectern, suit severe, tie ink dark. No screens, no chyrons. Just a man with a microphone and a building that measured time by his pauses. "We are not a good company because we are big," he said. "We are good when we remember what we are for." He let it sit. "We build for relief, not applause. That means attributing work where it begins, not where it ends. We will fail sometimes. We failed recently. We corrected. We will keep correcting. Not because anyone is watching, but because those who are not, the warehouse worker at 3 p.m. whose system crashes, the school office where the receipt printer won't work, deserve a company that tells itself the truth." And then, her name. Not as martyr or cautionary tale, as author. Not our, her. The hush in the room wasn't silence, it was rightness. Applause rose, not asked for, but because something crooked had been set back on its hinges. "Say something," Elaine urged. Harper didn't. She watched him leave the stage, head up but not high, the auditorium adjusting itself. She closed the laptop. The oilcloth table, patched with tape, collected crumbs along its seams and stared back without judgment. "What are you thinking?" Elaine asked. "That justice is a fact," Harper said slowly, "and healing is a practice." "Different speeds," Elaine agreed. "I'm not ready to go back," Harper admitted. "I don't want a triumphant return when the bruise still blooms." "You don't have to," Elaine said. "You can just be a woman making soup and walking with pockets that know her hands." They walked that afternoon. 3 miles an hour restores dignity to humiliated bodies. The sky turned New England blue. Promise and dare. The vines were bare but not dead, listening like old men. Elaine pointed out the rotted posts. Plans were made with optimism, cheap enough to feel rich. "We'll make it last." Later, Harper opened a box in the mudroom. Her father's hand on labels, soil reports stained with coffee, a vineyard map with rows named after songs, stardust, autumn leaves, take 5. In a folder marked legal, fragile, she found the property seizure from years ago, debts winning bureaucracy. She read to the end. Her mother set tea beside her, honey glowing like sunlight. The text came, "Check the porch." On the porch sat a weathered envelope, pilgrim worn. Inside, a government-stamped title transfer. And a note typed in the font of legibility itself. "This is not a gift. It is a correction, a restart if you want it. Lucas Callahan." No apology, no romance. Just truth with boots on. Elaine wiped her eyes privately, then stood ready. Harper sat on the step, porch holding her like a hand. "Not a gift," she read again. "A correction." Elaine squeezed her shoulder. "The kind of man who writes that sentence is either dangerous or worth your time. Or both." "I don't want him to be the reason I stand up," Harper said. "Then don't let him. Let him be the reason a bureaucrat had to sign what you were owed. The standing is yours." Days rearranged themselves around the deed. Calls to the county clerk. A lawyer with a paper-scented office. A neighbor with a tractor and a good back. Harper worked like someone with a future. Lists, budgets flirting with sanity. A butcher paper calendar. Pencil lines and hope. The vines needed pruning. Posts replacing. Her father's half-dream of a tasting room resurrected. At night she started a document she didn't name, then did. Bennett Estate Wines, a plan that doesn't lie. Pods of neighbours, ownership over bureaucracy, metrics that made sense, bottles filled, weekends booked, customers smiling, uncoached. Grief loosened its grip. Joy drafted itself. Jordan called from a city that sounded like an argument. "You're a legend," he said. She swatted it away. He torched them. "With facts, not fire. We have new rules that bite. People are nicer, or faking it better. I'll take it." "And you?" she asked. "Boundaries," he said. "Devon and I, complicated. And honest? Working on it. I am, at least. Wish you were here." "I'm where I should be," she said, and meant it. A week later, a package arrived. Pruning shears. Heavy, balanced, unapologetically expensive. No note. Return address. A tower. She held them, and new tools carry philosophies. Cut clean. Respect growth. Don't be sentimental with what needs to go. She didn't write back, but one morning she carried them to Stardust and made her first cut. Forgiveness might feel like this. Clean, necessary, not waiting for the offender to understand. The next day, the phone rang. Lucas, untied. "People in rooms you don't want are learning. Your name is a boundary. There's a job with your name on it if you ever decide a building can be a tool again." "I'm not ready." "I know." "Thank you," she said, "for the correction." "Don't thank me," he said. "You paid for it with blood. No goodbye. Just distance as room, not punishment." By the end of the week, her butcher paper plan had grown ivy annotations. Elaine red-penned the budget. The neighbor arrived with donuts and a crew of laughing teenagers. Harper stood in the barn doorway, light slanting, dust motes masquerading as stars, and saw not a rescue, but a beginning that had learned from what almost broke it. Evening pressed the fields flat into painter's color. An owl mispronounced the dark. Her phone buzzed. "Jordan, he named you again, not in a speech, in a meeting that mattered. They can't unknow it now." Another message, number unsaved but no longer feared. No pressure, no timeline. Build what's yours. Wind lifted the hair at her temple. Her mother sang a second verse because the first was not enough. Harper touched the porch post, rough with honest weather, and held on. She didn't think of New York as destination. She thought of it as a tool. Justice as compass, not finish line. A man who'd learned precision in sentences, maybe someday the grammar of kitchens. A vineyard named for a family that refused to be a footnote. The stars arrived. She lifted the pruning shears, steel catching twilight. A quiet promise in her hand. Tomorrow, she thought, or the day after, or both. And as the screen door creaked, always home, now also future, the question that had hovered for weeks didn't vanish. It softened, waiting with her on the threshold for an answer she hadn't chosen. Not yet. The envelope had arrived without fanfare, as if miracles preferred side doors. Weathered, anonymous, stamped by a government machine that knew nothing of longing, it carried within it the transfer of a vineyard that had once been her father's, then not, and now, by some collision of justice and audacity, hers again. Harper had unfolded the deed on the kitchen table, her hands trembling as if the paper were flame. The note inside was simple, its voice unmistakable. Not a gift, a correction, a restart. Lucas Callahan. She had read it aloud, her mother at her side, the kitchen lamp pooling golden light on wood, scratched by decades of elbows and knives. Elaine had nodded with tears she refused to let run unchecked. "The kind of man who writes that," she'd said, "either knows what it costs to be unseen or he's learning." For days, Harper carried the deed folded in her coat pocket, as if the paper itself radiated a new kind of heat. She would unfold it sometimes when alone, on the porch with the morning frost on the steps, in the barn where dust turned to gold in the afternoon light, and read it again. Not a gift. She believed him. Lucas didn't know how to give gifts, only how to make amends with the blunt precision of a ledger. It was his way of saying, I saw what was stolen. I put it back. The rest is yours. But redemption doesn't arrive in one envelope. It lingers, it builds, it asks to be noticed in the small, repeated gestures a man makes when no one is looking. Lucas had not called often. When he did, his voice carried across the miles with the even timbre of someone who had trained himself to sound like a solution, never a problem. Yet Harper could hear the edges. Fatigue he could not edit out. Silences that felt less like calculation and more like a man teaching himself how not to hold on too tightly. He never asked her to return. He never pressed her for forgiveness. Instead, he spoke only in terms of correction, of rebuilding, of letting her name stand where it belonged, in rooms that once had erased it. She would listen, sometimes with her eyes closed, leaning against the kitchen doorframe, hearing the wind thread itself through the pines outside, hearing his voice thread itself through her reluctance inside. He spoke of policies rewritten, of Stella gone, of new structures where attribution wasn't just a promise, but a mechanism. And when he faltered, and once, only once she heard him falter, he admitted in a voice lower than any boardroom had ever heard, I don't know what forgiveness looks like. I only know what correction requires. And that somehow was more human than any apology could have been. The vineyard became their language, though he wasn't there to touch it. When the pruning shears arrived in their heavy velvet box, steel balanced, sharp enough to take a finger if misused, Harper knew whose hand had chosen them. No note, just the tool itself. His way of saying, build this. I can't do it for you, but I can put steel in your hand. She held them the way one might hold a key to a room that has waited years to be opened. Day by day, she learned to cut back the vines with precision, removing what was weak, leaving what was strong, accepting that growth required sacrifice. The metaphor was not lost on her, and each cut echoed with a line she'd heard in his voice once, almost unguarded. I want what survives daylight. In the barn, as neighbors came to help shore up beams and replace rotted posts, she would think of him, alone in his tower of glass, orchestrating justice with silence and policy, while she orchestrated life with rope, sweat, and the laughter of teenagers bribed with cider. Their worlds could not have been further apart, yet the bridge between them was undeniable, the shared act of correction. Then one afternoon, Jordan called, his voice carrying the giddiness of someone watching tectonic plates shift in real time. He did it, Jordan said. Lucas stood up in a meeting with the investors, no slides, no numbers, and he said, if you want a company that values theft over truth, find another company. As long as I run this one, we name the hands that build. They applauded Harper, investors. They applauded. Harper laughed. The sound startled out of her, bright and shaking. She pressed a hand to her chest as if to keep something from flying out. Do you realize what that means? Jordan went on. It means he burned currency on you, the kind CEOs hoard. He spent it, publicly, for someone who isn't even in the building anymore. She sat on the porch steps, the phone warm against her cheek, the winter wind needling her hair. She didn't reply right away, because she realized, in that moment, what redemption was. Not a grand gesture, not a gift. It was costly. It cost him, and he had chosen to pay. Yet Harper didn't return. Not yet. The wounds still had color. The bruises hadn't faded into lessons. They were still bruises. She needed distance. She needed the vineyard. She needed mornings where the first decision was whether to light the stove, not how to survive a room. And Lucas, for all his flaws, seemed to understand. So the distance remained. And through that distance, redemption deepened, not because he erased what had happened, but because he refused to rewrite it. He carried it, acknowledged it, and left her free to decide what came next. One evening, weeks later, Harper found a second envelope on the porch. Inside was no deed this time, no shears, just a single page, typed in the same relentless font, unsigned yet unmistakably his. I can't return the time you lost. I can't erase the silence that cut deeper than the lies. What I can do is step back and keep the doors open if you ever want to walk through them again. Not as an employee, not as someone erased and rewritten. As yourself, entire, free, Elsie. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into the drawer beside her bed, under the scarf she hadn't worn since New York. She didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She simply lay back and stared at the ceiling, where the tin stars she'd arranged as a girl still glimmered faintly, as if waiting for her to decide which constellation to follow. Lucas Callahan's redemption was not a thunderclap. It was a steady weather, changing the air one pressure point at a time, until the storm that had defined him no longer fit the sky. And for Harper, watching from the distance of fields and wood smoke, it was enough. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But enough to know that people, even the ones carved from ice, could choose to turn toward the sun. New York greeted her with a sharper kind of brightness, the kind that bounces off glass and never quite warms you. The train slid into Penn Station with a weary sigh, and Harper stepped onto the platform with a small suitcase and the ache that comes from trying to sleep in motion. Vermont clung to her coat in the faint smell of wood smoke and winter soap. The city responded with steam rising from street grates and the impatient choreography of a weekday morning. She hadn't come back to reclaim a desk. In her tote sat a letter, printed, signed, folded once, with an edge sharp enough to cut. A resignation, asking for nothing except to be real. She would hand it to HR, return the last badge they hadn't managed to collect, and leave. But first, there was one stop to make. Not obligation, not nostalgia. Geometry. The 40th floor had always been the highest point in the building, where the air still remembered who it belonged to. The lobby was the same. Marble, hush, security guards standing with the kind of posture that measured importance. She moved through it with a lightness she hadn't known before, as if the ground beneath her shoes had finally stopped arguing with her weight. The elevator mirrored her face back without judgment. Floors ticked past like pages turning. 38, 39. The soft chime that had haunted her dreams. On 40 the air was cool but not cruel. The assistant's desk gleamed with order. A vase of winter branches gave the room the look of something alive on purpose. Harper expected interrogation. Instead, the assistant looked up, recognized her, and stood. "Miss Bennett," she said. "No surprise, no performance. He's expecting you." Of course he was. Harper walked the familiar length to the walnut door. The carpet gave nothing away. She knocked once and entered. Lucas stood by the window, jacket off, sleeves crisp to the wrist, the skyline behaving itself beneath a thin veil of cloud. The desk, immaculate as always, was its own grammar. On the small round table where he preferred to make decisions, 2 glasses of water waited like parentheses. He turned. No theatrics. Just a brief inventory, and then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders eased, as though some long calculation had finally resolved. "Miss Bennett," he said. "Mr. Callahan." They stood in that extra beat beyond formality. Then he gestured to the chair opposite the small table, not the subordinate's seat across the desk. She sat. He did too. The water glasses sweated faintly, the condensation an honest admission in a room designed to pretend everything behaved. Harper reached into her tote and slid the letter onto the table. "I came to deliver this in person," she said. "No email, no thread, just a clean line." He didn't touch it. His eyes passed over the title, then returned to her. "You could have sent an agent or a courier." "I wanted the paper to feel the room before it left it," she said. A corner of his mouth acknowledged the sentence without becoming a smile. His hands folded. The cufflinks, quiet ones today, caught a blade of pale light. "You've been busy," he said. Not a question. "Vines like structure," she replied. "So do small towns, and grief when you let it work instead of rule." He nodded once. "I heard." "No, from whom?" "Jordan, probably." The right people had a way of hearing without moving their lips. She let the thought pass. "Thank you," she added, "for the deed." "It was a correction," he said. "You paid for it with wounds I didn't stop soon enough." "I know," she said, surprised at how easily the softness came without giving up ground. "Thank you, anyway." Silence adjusted itself. Companion now, not guard. Harper looked down at the letter. "I'm not angry," she said, tracing its edge with her fingertip. "Not in the way that makes for a good story. I'm finished with this chapter, a clean ending, no cliffhangers, no notes in the margin." "Are you asking me to contest it?" His curiosity was faint, almost disguised as concern. "I'm asking you to accept it," she said, "not as defeat, as a design choice." He drew one slow breath. Accepted. The word loosened something inside her chest, not relief, alignment. "Your name will remain on the work," he added, "permanently. That's non-negotiable." She held his gaze. "Make it policy, not mercy." "It already is." They let that stand. Through the window, the river flashed dull pewter, the color New York wears when it doesn't intend to seduce. Cabs striped the avenues like yellow thoughts. Inside, hidden systems hummed, holding the temperature steady. "I didn't ask you here only to accept a letter," he said. "I know," she almost smiled. "Your assistant said you were expecting me." "I was." He turned a folder toward her. Inside, an invitation printed on thick paper with a serif font that pretended the future had a classical education. Founders Circle Gala, Bennett Estate Wines, grand opening May. A watermark of vines, a small star at the bottom, her father's stubborn insistence that stars belonged wherever people needed to look up. Her hand warmed against the paper. "Where did you get this?" "Public filings," he said, "plus an optimistic printer. If I'm early, tell me to slow down." She laughed, startled. "You're early," she said, "but not wrong." "I'd like to be there," he said, after a pause, as someone who bought a bottle and stood in the back. No speeches? No speeches. No rescues. Not even in my pocket. The room shifted, as though remembering its own heart. Harper studied the invitation, then returned it to the folder, like a tool set back in place after testing its balance. "I'm not ready to make promises," she said. "I didn't ask for one." The past didn't climb onto the table to narrate itself. It stayed where it belonged, acknowledged but uninvited. "Before I go," she said, "I should say something. You told me once you wanted what survives daylight. I do too, but daylight can be cruel. It shows dust, it shows seams. It's also the only way vineyards grow," he said. She gave him a look that was both gratitude and warning. "Then let me say this in daylight," she whispered. "I wanted you, in a way that scared me, in a way that threatened my work, my life. I still don't know if what I wanted was you, or just the feeling of being seen by someone built entirely out of no." He didn't flinch. "And now I want to build something that isn't an argument," she said. "If that includes you someday, it'll be because the shape of our lives can hold it without breaking." "This building isn't designed for that," he said. "I know," she answered. "That's why I'm taking the stairs down." A small exhale slipped through his nose. Not laughter, not surrender. "I won't follow." "I didn't ask you to." He glanced once at the letter, still untouched. "What do you need from me right now?" She surprised herself with how quickly the answer came. "Witness. Just be here while I put my name where I want it." He nodded. She took his pen, heavy, unpretentious, and signed. The letters were clean, the flourish small. She dated it, slid it back. He read once, closed the folder, and set it aside with a care that felt like respect, not possession. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not arguing with a decision that makes you smaller in the story." His eyes held hers. "I'm smaller in many stories," he said. "This is the first one that feels right about it." They rose together, quiet wrapped around them, no longer dangerous, just precise. "I'll take the long way out," she said. "I want to see the building when it isn't a weather system." "Stop by 38, he said, a hint but not a pull. "Jordan will pretend he wasn't waiting. I'll find him. He needs a plant back." The almost smile ghosted across his mouth and disappeared. At the door, her hand on the handle, he spoke once more, his voice low, a glass of water set quietly at a bedside. "Harper." She half turned. "Lucas, if you ever need cover," he said, "ask for it with your name first. I'll stand behind it, not in front." "Good," she said. "That's where you belong." She left without looking back. The hallway felt different, leaving than arriving, as if the building had shifted slightly to fit her new outline. On 38, she found Jordan, surrounded by the chaos of a department learning better manners. He nearly toppled his chair, standing. "You look like Vermont taught you to sleep," he said, his eyes briefly wet before the city returned to them. "It taught me to prune," she said. "Different muscle, same lesson." They hugged longer than office etiquette allowed. She handed him the plant. He exhaled, like someone finally forgiven by oxygen. "Are you back?" he asked carefully. "No," she said gently. "I'm just saying goodbye to the parts I don't want anymore. Then let me walk you out." They took the stairs. At the lobby, she handed the envelope to HR with a smile not meant for them, but for the life waiting outside. Papers stamped, systems updated. A new young clerk whispered, "I'm rooting for you," then looked instantly guilty for saying it. Harper stepped into the city. Afternoon light goldened the streets, pretending spring. Vendors called, horns blared, pedestrians passed with practiced choreography. She felt the strange weightlessness of someone who had chosen and found the ground waiting. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, then Jordan's follow-up. "That's him? He wants to make sure he didn't intrude." She opened the first. "Thank you for coming yourself. I'll see you when the vines are ready to be seen." No signature, no demand for a reply. She slipped the phone away without typing. She walked. Not toward urgency, but toward honesty. The wind found the space between scarf and skin, reminding her she still belonged to weather. She cut east, then north, then east again, following streets her body remembered from before ambition learned to bruise. At a corner florist, buckets of ranunculus spilled sherbet orange, linen white, bruised red. She bought a bunch, asked him to leave the stems long. Brown paper, string. Flowers meant for a kitchen table 2 states away, fluent in the language of work. She held them close and pictured May, tables under string lights, glasses catching sunset, her mother laughing in the doorway, neighbors turning into friends. She pictured, too, a figure at the back, not savior, not center, just a man with his hands in his pockets, watching something grow he did not own. She turned toward the station. Traffic hummed. A siren scratched its red line across the block. Above, the sky made a promise it didn't have to keep. Light, then more light. At the crosswalk, she paused, not doubting, but because pauses are where decisions breathe. The wind pressed the paper around the stems until it sounded like pages turning. She glanced once toward the tower, once toward the train. "Not a gift," she whispered. "A correction." Then she crossed, spring wrapped in string against her chest. She didn't see the black town car paused a block away, or the man inside, hands still gaze steady, choosing silence over intrusion. He watched until she vanished beneath the station awning. Then he looked up at the thin sky and said nothing. The largest sentence he knew. The train announced itself. The platform swelled. Harper found her place in the crowd, bouquet against her chest, the rhythm of departure finding its way into her bones. Just before stepping aboard, that moment where one life becomes the corridor to another, she took out her phone, opened a blank message, and typed a line that invited nothing, dismissed nothing, but rang like a cord left hanging. "We'll see if the vines forgive us." She didn't send it. Not yet. The door chimed, the train pulled, the city slid backward, and the story, stubborn as spring, refused to resolve itself before it was ready. By late afternoon, the valley glowed the color of ripe honey. Light poured over the Vermont hills and pooled in the rows of vines, as if something ancient had remembered itself. A breeze threaded through the leaves, making 1,000 small hands applaud. Clouds drifted single file across the ridge behind the barn, arriving like guests who knew to wait until the tables were set. Harper stood at the threshold of the new tasting room and watched the day prepare a runway for the night. The sign above the door read, "Bennett Estate Wines," letters carved, not painted, serifed with honesty rather than fashion. The cedar siding still carried the faint perfume of sap and sawdust. Inside, the bar gleamed with oil and elbow grease. The glassware sparkled in tidy ranks, and chalkboards listed flights she and her mother had named together at the kitchen table, laughing over cherries. Stardust, Take 5, Old Porch, Granite Wind. Near the register sat a crate of postcards, each stamped with a silver star, because her father had always insisted stars belonged wherever people needed a reason to look up. Neighbors came first, then their cousins, then strangers who quickly became friends as corks popped and glasses filled. Outside, cafe lights hung on wires strung between posts that once leaned, but now stood square and strong. Mason jars of ranunculus glowed like pocket-sized sunsets. From the barn's wide threshold, a fiddle, a mandolin, and a gentle voice wrapped the yard in music that felt borrowed from another century. Elaine moved through the crowd like the evening had been written for her. Hug here, a napkin folded there, a pitcher of water refilled before anyone asked. She wore a dress the color of early apples and a smile that made people stand taller without realizing. When her eyes found Harper's, she lifted 2 fingers. "You're on." Harper exhaled. The note cards in her hand were warm from being held all day. She didn't need them. The words lived in her bones, alongside the map of the vines, the calendar of pruning, and the memory of a winter when the radiator hissed like a tired prophet. Still, she slipped the cards into her pocket, because some rituals keep the tremor quiet. Jordan appeared at her side, a bright exclamation point in a suit he called Vermont formal. Clean jacket, knit tie, boots. "You ready, Founder?" he whispered. "No." "Yes." She glanced at the crowd. "Both." "That's the point," he said. "Go remind them of a story they already know, but forgot." She stepped onto the low platform built from salvaged floorboards. The hum softened, glasses paused mid-air. A child froze with a strawberry at her lips like a microphone. The light caught Harper's face and turned her eyes the color of the long river beyond the hills. "Thank you," she began, her voice carrying like a bell that had waited years to ring. "Thank you for coming to the opening of Bennett Estate Wines." Laughter and applause rose, generous and unpolished. She waited. This place took its time becoming itself. We had vines that forgot how to trust their roots, posts that leaned like tired men, beams that wanted replacing but didn't know how to ask. Our ledger was a poem about patience. A ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. And we had help. Marcy, she nodded at the teenagers who had hauled gravel and laughter in equal measure. So much help. She spoke of the acre names, how her father christened rows after songs, because music is what you plant when you want to remember joy. She told of the first clean cut with the new shears, how brutal and holy it had felt, how pruning is really the art of making room for what wants to live. She recalled frost that lingered too long and sun that forgave its stubbornness. She never said New York or company or suspension. She didn't have to. The crowd heard it anyway, in the cadence of a woman who had learned the difference between a gift and a correction. At the edge of the lawn, beneath a maple older than most marriages in town, a man in a dark suit stood with his hands in his pockets. He didn't try to vanish, men like him don't, but he respected the geometry of distance. A few faces turned, then politely looked away. Small towns remember what gossip costs. Harper's gaze drifted unfocused until it found him the way eyes find the horizon. For half a second, the breath of the evening shifted. Then she held the crowd again. "Some of you came to see if we could actually pour what we promised," she said, smiling quick enough to make the yard grin back. "Some of you came because you loved my parents. Some of you came because you heard there'd be music, lights, and free cheese boards." Laughter spilled, easy and true. "But if you leave with anything, let it be this. We built this to feel like relief." She paused. Not applause. The air caught. People don't often hear their private ache named aloud. Elaine rubbed her eye with a knuckle and blamed an itch. Jordan stared at the sky as if it had spoken first. Harper lifted a glass of old porch, straw-colored in the light. "To those who held us when the beams were raw. To those who corrected what needed correcting. To those who showed up with donuts and a tractor, to those who came back when they could have stayed gone. And to the work, always the work, which is the truest way I know to say I love you." Glasses rose. Clinks echoed like coins tossed into a well that still answers. For a moment, the entire yard carried the same warmth. Music wove into a waltz, dressed down for boots. Couples stepped into the grass and let memory do the math. The child finally bit her strawberry and declared, "Sweet," to everybody and nobody. Harper stepped down and was pulled into the whirl of embraces, gratitude, and the sacred ordinariness of opening night. A question about the acidity of granite wind, 3 more napkins. An uncle asking if this was the same barn where he'd kissed her aunt sophomore year. No, different barn, same theory. She signed bottles with a silver pen. Hugged the friend who had taught her to drive stick, caught a cork mid-flight like a magician with one trick. After an hour that felt like 5 minutes in a decade, she slipped toward the fence line where the lights didn't reach. The vines stretched into the dusk, furrows softening to purple. She pressed her palms to the rail and let her body expand to include crickets tuning up and plates clinking in rhythm. Here the world asked nothing of her but presence. Footsteps approached, steady, unhurried, belonging to a man who had learned not to apologize for ground he took, but who now measured it. She turned only when the steps stopped in the half-shadow. "Congratulations," Lucas said. Her chest loosened in a breath she hadn't known she was holding. She kept her eyes on the horizon. "You came." "I asked to stand in the back," he said. "Your mother stationed me by the jam." "She outranks everyone," Harper said, "even gravity." She glanced at him. "Thank you for the deed, for the policies, for putting my name where it belonged." "It belonged there," he said simply. Up close, he looked less like a verdict than a man worn honestly, tie loosened, lines etched by focus, a mouth that had trained itself to speak only when needed. He wasn't beautiful. He was true. "Do you forgive me?" he asked. The fact he asked at all rolled something heavy off her ribs. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right tool," she said. "Correction was, distance was. Tonight is. Tomorrow? Ask me tomorrow." He nodded. "Then let me ask another. Do you choose me here?" "Here. Not in boardrooms, not in blue-lit towers, but here, among leaves, wood, and sky." She didn't rush. She watched a moth leave the bulb for darkness. She listened to her mother's laugh sail across the yard. She studied the line of his profile, jaw once imagined as anger, but now understood as restraint. "I choose the woman I am here," she said at last. "If you can stand beside her without making her smaller or safer, then yes, I choose you here." He let the words breathe, then answered, "I can stand beside, I can step back, I can fail and ask again." She faced him fully, The barn glowed behind him. "Then come into the light," she said. He stepped forward. The string lights caught his eyes and turned them river-colored. She touched his lapel. He let her. He smelled faintly of cedar and rain. "Harper," he said, warning and prayer. "Lucas," she replied, the same. The first touch wasn't a kiss, but a decision. She cupped his jaw, and he tilted into her palm like a man teaching himself not to take, even when offered. "Look at me," she said. He did. "Not a gift," she whispered, smile breaking and mending at once. "A correction." He breathed like someone surfacing at last. Then she rose and kissed him. No music swelled, no spotlight. Just two people slowing inside a world that kept moving. His hand found her back, her palm pressed his ribs and felt discipline miscount its breath. Heat gathered, then steadied. In the distance, her mother laughed. The vines applauded with their own green whisper. They parted by a breath, foreheads touching. His eyes, unarmored, revealed orchards of careful seasons and one reckless spring. "You asked for daylight," he said. "This is all I have." "It's enough," she said. "It's the only thing that is." A cheer rose from the bar for reasons unrelated, but somehow entirely about them. Harper laughed against his mouth. He answered with a low sound like a door opening into a new room. They walked back into the light together. People made space without asking why. Elaine lifted her chin in a mother's nod. The world had finally lined up with her laundry-folded prayers. At the bar, Harper handed Lucas a bottle of Stardust. "Buy something," she teased. "Oh, we have policies about freeloaders." "Yes, ma'am," he said, deadpan. The bartender grinned, unaware he was serving a billionaire CEO who once spoke in ice. Couples danced, glasses clinked, stars multiplied overhead. Harper nudged Lucas toward the grass. "Dance? I'm better at policies." "Tonight," she said, "policy is dancing." He let himself be led, the truest test of redemption. Awkward for 3 beats, then finding their rhythm. His hand was sure without claiming. Her steps were light without apology. The waltz ended. He spun her once, careful as if turning a page, and when she returned, they kissed again, certain, deliberate, not as spectacle, but as punctuation. Applause rose. Harper leaned her head briefly on his shoulder. He exhaled like a man finally convinced exhaling was allowed. "Stay," she whispered, not as command but as blessing. He didn't promise. He didn't need to. Because the vines kept working in the dark, roots deepening, leaves reading the old poetry of wind, fruit forming in patience's secret mathematics. She kissed him once more, softer, a seal rather than a spell. And just as the first star declared itself, the cafe lights swayed in the breeze, hinting at weather drifting in from the west. Gentle, welcome, almost here. She smiled, eyes bright, a question resting at the corner of her mouth like a secret waiting its turn. The night leaned closer, nosy and infinite, eager to hear what they would call it. In the end, Harper's story was never just about accidents or even redemption. It was about a woman who chose to stand tall when silence tried to erase her, and about a man who learned that correction can be stronger than control. Their love didn't arrive as a gift, but as a practice, rooted, pruned, and grown under honest light. And maybe, just maybe, this story is also about us, about what we choose to hold on to and what we dare to let go. If this story moved you, leave a like so it can reach more hearts. Subscribe to the channel and share in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? Your presence is what keeps these stories alive.